Good evening. Welcome to the May 24th, 2021 Troy City Council meeting. Please rise for the invocation and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. We give you thanks, Father in heaven, for the blessings you've given each and every one of us in the city of Troy. We ask that you continue to bless us this evening by giving us the power and the strength to have good conversation, wise counsel, and a good thought process to do only good for the city of Troy. We ask that you please be with all of those who are in need of your help and love and support this evening, and please guide us always. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, I'll call the May 24th, 2021 Troy City Council meeting to order, and we'll ask for the roll call. Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Here.
Councilmember Abraham?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Here.
Councilmember Chamberlain Krenga?
Here.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Here.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Here.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Here.
All present this evening. First on the agenda, certificates of recognition and special presentations. We have 3 of them. First one is C1, a proclamation for Mental Health Awareness Month, May 2021, and I will just read this into the record this evening. Again, it's a proclamation for Mental Health Awareness Month, May 2021. Whereas mental health is important for our individual well-being and vitality, as well as that of our families, communities, and businesses, and whereas the COVID-19 pandemic has been a reminder of the importance of integrating mental health into preparedness and response plans for public emergencies, and whereas younger adults, racial and ethnic minorities, essential workers, and adult caregivers reported having disproportionately worse mental health outcomes, increased substance abuse, and elevated suicidal ideation associated with COVID-19, and whereas 1 in 6 U.S. children aged 2 through 8 years old has a diagnosed mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder that, if untreated, can lead to school failure, physical illness, substance abuse, jail, and even suicide. And whereas May 6, 2021 is designated the National Children's Mental Health Awareness Day, and May 2nd through May 8, 2021 is designated as Children's Mental Health Awareness Week. And whereas Oakland Community Health Network is committed to being a zero suicide organization and to cultivate a network of providers who are engaged in the zero suicide philosophy. And whereas mental illness is a biologically based brain disorder that cannot be overcome through willpower, and is not related to a defect in a person's character or intelligence. And whereas stigma and stereotypes associated with mental illnesses often keep people from seeking treatment that could improve their quality of life. And whereas mental health recovery not only benefits individuals with mental health disorders by focusing on their abilities to live, work, learn, and fully participate and contribute to our society, but also enriches the culture of our community life. And whereas the Oakland Community Health Network and its service provider agencies are committed to inspiring hope, empowering people, and strengthening communities, now therefore be it resolved that the City Council of the City of Troy and the Oakland Community Health Network recognizes May 2021 as Mental Health Month. And be it further resolved that we call upon our citizens, public and private institutions, businesses, and schools to recommit our state to increasing awareness and understanding of mental illness and the need for appropriate and accessible services for all people with mental illnesses to promote recovery. This is presented this 24th day of May 2021. Next on the agenda is C2, a proclamation in recognition and appreciation of the Troy Public Library on their 50th anniversary at the 510 West Big Beaver location. I'm actually going to read this into the record and present it down to Emily Dumas, our library director. Where'd she go? Oh, there she is. Getting used to things again back here. We're going to come down here, but because of the way things are set up, we're going to face the council, okay? So I'll meet you down here. This is awkward because usually I'm facing this way, but I'm going to face you today. So it's exciting for, I don't know where to look, but it's exciting for us. You know, we do have a new library director, Emily, and we're, again, excited to have you here as part of our Troy Public Library, and we're kind of reintroducing you to in-person and welcoming everybody. So I have this proclamation I want to present to you, and in recognition of appreciation of the Troy Public Library on your 50th anniversary at the 510 West Big Beaver location. So I'm going to read it. Whereas in 1959, the Troy City Commission appointed a 10-member library committee to investigate the possibility of a library for Troy. Whereas in June 1962, the Friends of the Troy Public Library formed to help collect books and help finance the project. 3 months later, in September, the Troy Public Library Reading Room, Troy's first library, opened in 2 rooms in the Troy High School with a collection of 1,000 books. At this time, Troy had a population of just over 20,000 people. And whereas as the city's population grew, so did the library's collection. By 1965, the library outgrew its space in the high school and moved its 2,450 items to a storefront building at 61 East Square Lake Road in Livernois. In 1967, the library moved into an even bigger location at 5044 Rochester Road, north of Long Lake. And whereas by 1970, Troy's population had more than doubled in 10 years to over 39,000 people, and the Troy Library collection expanded to 22,282 items. And whereas due to Troy's continuing population boom, the Troy City Commission voted to fund construction for a new permanent library building via 30-year bonds in 1968. The groundbreaking for the new Troy Public Library and the Troy Civic Center on Big Beaver and I-75 was on January 24, 1970. Construction continued throughout that year. And whereas on May 16, 1971, the Troy Public Library opened its doors for the first time to the public at 510 West Big Beaver. The entire library stood what is in the space now occupied just by the current youth area, which you know, of course. Now, therefore, be it known that the City Council of the City of Troy takes this opportunity to express its appreciation to all of the Troy Public Library directors and staff for their hard work and dedication in meeting all of the information needs of the Troy community for so many years. And be it further known that the Troy City Council, city management, and the citizens of the City of Troy congratulate the Troy Public Library on their 50th anniversary at the 510 West Big Beaver Road location, and commend the directors and staff, past and present, for working diligently to make our library an important and vital community resource. So this is presented this 24th day of May 2021. Get to say happy birthday to the building, to you, Emily, and again, formally welcome you to our council chambers, and you'll be here a lot over the next coming years, especially as we do work on our library and you're going to be doing things. So I don't have the actual proclamation that I'm supposed to give to you right now, so I just, again, I want to say congratulations, and
Thank you.
we appreciate the library. I don't know if you want to say a few words, again, you don't have to, I'm putting you on the spot, but
Oh, I just wanted to thank the council, the mayor for having us here, the city staff, and also our patrons who continue to support us year after year. It's been a great 50 years, and here's to 150 more. Thank you.
looks kind of funny without the proclamation, but we're working things back. We're getting back. Okay, next up on the agenda is C3, a proclamation to declare June 4th, 2021 National Gun Violence Awareness Day in the City of Troy. And I believe somebody is on Zoom, and I will be presenting to her. Where is she here?
Mayor, excuse me, Mayor, I believe Justine Galbraith is on. So
Justine
she's-
Galbraith, all right. Do we get to see her?
Yes. So Justine, I've unmuted you, so go ahead.
Let's see her.
Oh, hello. Thank you so much.
Hi, Justine, how are you?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, thank you. Glad to be presenting this proclamation tonight. This hybrid version is interesting for all of us, so. All right, so this is a proclamation to declare June 4th. I'm going to read it into the record, Justine, and then I'll give you an opportunity to say a few words. It's a proclamation to declare June 4th, 2021 National Gun Violence Awareness Day in the City of Troy. Whereas every day more than 100 Americans are killed by gun violence, alongside more than 230 who are shot and wounded, and on average there are more than 13,000 gun homicides every year. Americans are 25 times more likely to be killed with guns than people in other countries. And whereas support for the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens goes hand in hand with keeping guns away from dangerous people. Michigan has an average of 1,212 gun deaths every year with a rate of 12.1 deaths per 100,000 people. Michigan has the 31st highest rate of gun deaths in the U.S. And whereas gun homicides and assaults are concentrated in cities, with more than half of all firearm-related gun deaths in the nation occurring in 127 cities. And whereas cities across the nation, including Troy, are working to end the senseless violence with the evidence-based solutions. Support for the Second Amendment rights of law-abiding citizens does go hand in hand with keeping guns away from people with dangerous histories. And whereas law enforcement agencies and local police departments know their communities best and are most familiar with local criminal activity and how to address it, and are best positioned to understand how to keep their citizens safe. And whereas gun violence prevention is more important than ever as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to exacerbate gun violence after more than a year of increased gun sales, increased calls to suicide and domestic violence hotlines, and an increase in city gun violence. And whereas in January 2013, 15-year-old Hadia Pendleton was tragically shot and killed, a group of Hadia's friends asked their classmates to commemorate her life by wearing orange. They chose this color because hunters wear orange to announce themselves to other hunters when out in the woods, and orange is a color that symbolizes the value of human life. And whereas anyone can join this campaign by pledging to wear orange on June 4th, 2021, to help raise awareness about gun violence. By wearing orange on Friday, June 4th, 2021, Americans will raise awareness about gun violence and honor the lives of gun violence victims and survivors. And whereas as a community, we renew our commitment to reduce gun violence and pledge to do all we can to keep firearms out of the wrong hands and encourage responsible gun ownership to help keep our children safe. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Troy City Council declares Friday, June 4th, 2021 to be National Gun Violence Awareness Day in the city of Troy, and encourages all citizens to support our community's efforts to prevent the tragic events of gun violence and to honor and value human lives. Be it further resolved that we encourage responsible gun ownership and pledge to do all we can to keep firearms out of the wrong hands to help keep our children safe. Justine, this is presented this 24th day of May 2021, and we appreciate you for bringing this to our attention. Again, you can see we've got, that's orange-ish, Councilmember Erickson Galt. Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, she always rocks the orange, so she's got it down. But Justine, I'll give you a few minutes, or go ahead and speak. We'd love to hear from you.
I did. I noticed the orange. Thank you so much. So just thanks so much for proclaiming Gun Violence Awareness Day, also known as Wear Orange Day. This is the 4th year in a row that Troy will be a part of a community that recognizes this day. Wear Orange Day honors Americans who have died by gun violence and offers a moment of solidarity with those who have survived. The color orange was chosen because when hunters wear it, orange is recognized as the color that means don't shoot. When we take part in Wear Orange, we link arms with those who've been hurt by gun violence. We remember those we've lost, and we commit to fighting gun violence together. This nationwide movement recognizes that though the streets may have been quiet for much of the pandemic, domestic gun violence increased. And sadly, as soon as quote unquote normal, American life opened back up, along with it resumed mass shootings. Gun violence is a complex problem with no one simple solution, and while people of good faith debate and work towards solutions, Wear Orange recognizes that with every gun death or injury, the devastation impacts outwardly, reverberating in circles of grief through families, friends, and communities. When we wear orange, we stand with the grieving, letting them know that their loved ones are not forgotten. For anyone who'd like to recognize this day, please wear orange on Friday, June 4th. Please visit momentsthatsurvive.org to share stories and read others. Please feel free to use the hashtag #WearOrange on social media or put an orange light bulb in your porch light. Sadly, with 36,000 annual gun deaths, we have become a nation of survivors, and any survivor who sees any of these efforts will know you honor them. Again, Troy City Council, thank you so much.
Thank you, Justine. Appreciate having you here via Zoom tonight. That concludes certificates of recognition and special presentations this evening. We have no carryover items, so we move on to public hearings, which we have 3 of this evening. First up is E1, Zoning Ordinance Text Amendment, file number ZOTA254, cluster square footage, and that'll be introduced by Brent Sabaton, our Community Development Director. Nice to see you, Brent.
Nice to see everyone. It's been a long time. I've been somewhat anxious about this because it's been 15 months and it's just weird. And this plastic screen is really weird because I see my reflection. And Mayor Baker, you've never looked better.
You must have a dirty screen in front of you.
So this is a proposed. I need the.
I won't work through here.
Okay.
You're just going to have to.
Okay. So next slide, please. So it's been a while, and we've got some new council members, and so we thought we'd take an opportunity just to insert just a slight educational component in this, also for people following at home or in the audience. So we're dealing with 3 issues tonight involving amending the City of Troy zoning ordinance. So what is the zoning ordinance? Well, it's Chapter 13 of the City Code of Ordinances. It's a law, and it regulates land development in the city. And what it does is it implements our policy document, which is the master plan. And City Council is responsible for approving all laws, including amendments to the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance is comprised of 350 pages of text and one zoning map. And the first 2 items before us this evening are amendments to the text. Next. So in terms of the text amendment process, it can be initiated in a number of different ways. A developer or a resident can submit a fee with an application. It can be initiated by the Planning Commission. They recognize something that needs to be fixed, or it can be initiated by City Council, who directs the Planning Commission to amend the ordinance, or at least to begin efforts of amending the zoning ordinance. And the Planning Commission is a recommending body for amendments, and they are required by law to hold a public hearing, and they make a recommendation for City Council, and ultimately City Council has authority to approve all laws. Next. That's the next one? Okay, thank you. It feels weird without my clicker. Before us, the first amendment is related to the one-family cluster development. And for the uninitiated, your first question is probably, what is a one-family cluster? It's a zoning concept, and it involves grouping or clustering homes within a development so that the remaining land on site can be preserved as open space. And this is done for a lot of different reasons, including preserving natural features, permitting creative design, and reducing infrastructure costs. It is an option available for developers. It's not by right. It actually requires City Council approval, and City Council doesn't see an application until the Planning Commission holds a public hearing and makes a recommendation on that development. They do require a minimum of 20% open space that's preserved through a dedicated easement or another instrument so that it's going to be open space in perpetuity. And the density bonuses are based on the parallel plan. I'll get into the bonuses in a second here. Next. So on the screen is try to come up with a good picture to kind of illustrate what a cluster development is. On the left, we've got a conceptual property. It's got wetlands. It's got some wooded areas. In the middle is a traditional type development where the developer kind of maxes out the number of units that they could put on the site under the underlying by right zoning district. In this example, with 10,500 square foot units, the developer could put in 60 units. You notice there's a stormwater detention basin near the road, and all the natural features are pretty well gone. On the right is a cluster development where the developer maintains a minimum of 20% open space. You can see it delineated there, preserves the wetland component, and gets a density bonus of 12 units to bring the total number of units to 72. So there's more units, higher density, but there's more open space preserved. And so it's an attempt to find that balance between it, basically incentivizing the preservation of open space with the trade-off being that there's more units provided to the developer. So it's an attempt to get a win-win for development. There's 3 ways to earn density bonuses. The first is preservation of open space. I indicated earlier there's a minimum 20% requirement. If a developer preserves 20% open space, there's a 20% bonus. If they preserve 30%, there's a 30% bonus, and so on. There's a sustainable design bonus of 10%. That's a very subjective standard, but basically it involves the developer providing sustainable features like just innovative stormwater, bioswales, rain gardens, things like that. And the third is option, which I'll talk about a little bit more, is housing diversity. As Councilmember Hamilton indicated today to me, the verbiage in the zoning ordinance is a little bit confusing, and I agree with you, Councilmember Hamilton. Essentially, what the provision provides is a one-for-one bonus above the base yield or above the parallel plan. So if the parallel plan indicates that the developer could develop 20 units by right, there's a one-to-one bonus or 20 additional units for providing a type of housing that's desired but underserved in the city. And it's very incentive laden. I mean, it's an attempt to get more of these types of units. Next slide. And one of the types of units that would qualify is the small home suitable for empty nesters and retirees. Here's an example of one on the screen. There's a minimum requirement to qualify that there must be a first floor master bedroom and that the maximum square footage cannot exceed 1,500 square feet. Again, these are small homes. These are not for large families. These are for people who are retired or who are not quite retired, but whose children have left the nest, and they don't need as large of a housing product that they used to need. There was some correspondence today for the Q&A with City Council, and I believe it was Councilmember Abraham who asked for a lot of information regarding approved cluster developments in the city. And I put together a table, and there was 8 cluster developments that were approved. And I did the math, and only 15% of all of the units that have been approved are these smaller units. So, and going back, for those of you who were on council at the time, I know Councilmember Hoderick was on council. There's probably other ones that I'm forgetting right now, but one of the things that we tried to accomplish with the cluster provision is to get more of these smaller type homes. And we haven't got what we were hoped to get in terms of this product. So we ask why? Why has the development community not delivered these smaller homes? And there's a lot of reasons. Every developer will tell you that on a per square foot basis, it's more expensive to build a smaller home and a ranch home. There's a really strong housing market. If you build it, you will sell it. So do the math. If it's cheaper per square foot to build the homes and you're going to sell it, the risk is a lot lower for the larger homes. There's some developers who are just not, they do what they do. And we have pre-app meetings. We encourage developers to build smaller homes, and they shrug their shoulders and say, I built 3,000 square foot homes. I'm not interested in going smaller. And the final point, and it's probably the most important, at 1,500 square feet, your margin for making changes to the footprint, it's just not there. So the developer, you don't want to go much smaller than 1,500 square feet because it's just too small. I mean, and it sounds weird saying this as someone who my first house was a 1,100 square foot ranch and I had 2 kids. But for this market with the master bedroom and the foyer and the kitchen dining room, that starts to add up. And when developers submit applications, they get the bonus, but it's only at 1,500 square feet. If they get a potential buyer and they say, I like that, but I need just a larger foyer, or add a foot to the bedroom, or add a foot here. If you add a foot over here, you got to take away a foot over there, and it becomes really very challenging to provide any type of flexibility for buyers. So that's another reason for maybe considering a little bit higher square footage. Next slide, please. So the proposed text amendment proposes just that. It's to increase the maximum square footage for homes that do qualify for the housing diversity bonus from 1,500 square feet to 1,900 square feet. And the Planning Commission held a public hearing on this item February 25th of 2020, pre-COVID obviously, and they recommended approval 7-0, and I can answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Brent. Appreciate the presentation and the educational component of it. I think it's an important reminder for us up here and for those who are watching at home and out in the audience. Questions from council for Mr. Savanant? There's a lot of glare, so. Councilmember Hamilton.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you for this strong answer to my question earlier. One question I had is, do developers have to do the open space option to even get this at all, or can they just do the housing diversity option? And then what is defined as open space? You know, I've read it before, but I know not every bit of non-building is. What is there a more specific definition? I know it's not directly relevant, but it kind of is.
Yeah, it's off the top of my head, and I'm not trying to give you a verbatim definition, but it's basically it's pervious area, traditional like landscape type area, and it's open. It's undeveloped and it's kind of left alone, so that in its natural state. And through the cluster development, the minimum 20% or 30% or whatever the percentage of open space that's provided, it's got to be maintained as open space in perpetuity. So each one of these developments comes with a legal document that the city attorney works on and approves to ensure that in perpetuity it will remain open space. So it's a way of even though it comes back to that balance where we get the development, but we hear a lot of residents complain about loss of open space. This is kind of, again, getting back to that win-win where we get the open space preservation and the development. Your first question, could developers build 1,500 or 1,900 square foot homes without going through this option? Absolutely. But as I indicated earlier, they're just not. For the reasons I cited. So we made the decision when we came up with this because it was like banging our head against the wall trying to get developers to think a little bit differently. And we came to the realization that really the only way to provide a carrot was to incentivize it the way we have. And we're still, it sounds like a really extreme bonus, this 1-for-1. It's been on the books since we came up with this provision 4 or 5 years ago, and we've only got 15% of the units that have been developed are these smaller units. So we're hoping to get more. We're hoping that Troy can become a place for a lot for people like I'm looking at in front of me who have larger homes. And who are these built for? Well, they're built for you, because someday you're going to want a smaller home, and the units just aren't there.
Just to clarify, so a developer, they would have to still do the open space option, or if they build the 1,500 to 1,900, would they still get a bonus, or do you have to stack that on top of the 20% open?
That's a bonus in addition to the other bonuses.
But do you have to do the original bonus to get that bonus? Could a developer
Yes.
take a piece of land
Yes.
and then build 1900s and get the bonus just from it? But they would also have to do the 20%.
They would also have to preserve
Got it.
a minimum of 20% open space. Yes.
Right. Thank you.
Councilmember Chamberlain Crango.
Thank you, Mayor. So thank you, Brent, so much for that description. As someone new to council and to understand this cluster option, because initially when I looked at it, I thought it seems counterintuitive to preserving open green space if they're becoming larger, but this is about a separate open space. It has nothing to do with the distance between the homes, so that's helpful. The question I have is regarding these homes of 1,500 square feet and what happens to them. So I know in our current master plan, it talks very vividly about this missing middle housing, how, as you said, our empty nesters, our seniors have a desire for smaller size homes around 1,500 square feet. Because the 1,900 square feet are actually, in my mind, those are medium size homes. My home is just over 1,900 square feet. My neighborhood, if you live in a neighborhood that was built in the 1970s, it's probably around 1,900 square feet. So I don't consider that a small home. And the seniors I've talked to in my neighborhood who are looking for something smaller, it's not 1,900, it's more 1,500. And I think my only concern is, how are we going to find ways to be able to help our seniors age in place and meet that concern that they may have by changing this? Is there any other way that we can incentivize those sorts of homes? I know there's not a market, but kind of what are other things that we might be able to do?
The proposed amendment does not preclude a developer from building 1,500 square feet. So, if there's, my thought is that as the baby boomers continue to age, and I think the market is going to finally come around. I indicated earlier that we have a lot of developers who shrug their shoulders and say it's not what I do. What I find, I'm just generalizing here, so developers watching on TV don't get mad at me, but for the most part, I find that the development community in Southeast Michigan is uncreative. And again, I'm generalizing. Not you know who I'm talking about, everyone else. But it's a copycat world. And what we need is some developers to take risks to build one of these developments or a few of these developments. And if it's successful and they sell really quickly, we'll see more. I really think that the market's going to come around. The Midtown, as an example, the Midtown Crossing development that was in one of the 8 approved developments that's on Rochester Road, the most phone calls I've got regarding inquiries asking, when's it going to come on the market? When can you email me plans? What, can you give me some more information? Was for the smaller home, 1,500 square feet. So the hope is that's very successful. They can't build them fast enough. And then again, the copycat world and the market. If we find that the seniors are getting neglected and the 1,900 square foot maximum is too big, we can amend. We can try a different approach. But again, we're not getting the 1,500 now, so we can still get a mix. Maybe half the units are 19, half are set. How's that for math? I was going to say half are 17, half are 15, but that doesn't work. But we could get a mix of 19, 17, 15, et cetera. And maybe there's a mixed use in terms of the footprint or the square footage of the homes. Did I answer your question?
That's helpful. And I do support the idea of capping it at 1,900 square feet. There are also other residents, young families, including like myself, who look at, as you mentioned, larger homes being built are around 3,000 square feet. And they're concerned of at some point not being able to afford a home in Troy and all that. So I think under this option and what it offers, I think it's sensible what we're putting forward.
If I could add one thing, Mayor Baker. We've got a developer in the city who's built a lot of these clusters, Mondrian Homes. Mondrian builds a quality home, okay? And if you saw the information packet I emailed out today that has a range of uses, you'll notice that almost, I believe all of his developments start at around 1,900 square feet and go bigger. And one of the CEOs of the company, Joe Maniaci, I've spoken to him numerous times about this, and he put his money where his mouth was, and he built a 1,900 and some square foot ranch on John R. south of Wattles. And I've walked it, and it's really nice. And when he has people that are looking at his models, he walks them through the ranch. And all of them, he said, according to Joe, all of them say, wow, this is really nice. But when it comes time to sign, and the per square foot construction costs or the resellability or whatever, for whatever reason, people don't buy the ranches. So he's proposed a ranch product as an option in every one of his developments, I believe, and he has not built one except for the model. So the market just is not responding to that type.
Additional questions from council? Oh, Councilmember Abraham.
First of all, Brent, thank you for answering all of my very detailed questions. But I think it was very helpful in providing context for what's been approved in terms of size and scope. I know, there have been a couple developers who've weighed in, and we always appreciate it. They certainly have their finger on the pulse. Can you, if this were to get approved tonight, if there were any cluster development projects that were, I'll say, in process but not before council yet for approval, would these new changes apply to those projects, or is it just for new projects going forward? If you could help provide some clarity for those that may be watching.
My understanding is that it would apply to new projects moving forward. And, as we all know, the days of farmers' fields are long behind us, so developers have to get really kind of creative for the most part to find this property. So, but they're finding it.
Additional questions? And let me open the public hearing for E1. I don't see anybody that has signed up specifically for E1. Is there anyone in the audience this evening that would like to speak on this public hearing, this zoning text amendment? Anybody online? City Clerk Dixon?
We do have some individuals in attendance on the Zoom call. If anyone on there wants to speak, please raise your hand and I'll call on you.
And again, it's relating to this public hearing for the zoning text amendment,
yes.
E1.
E1. There aren't any hands raised.
Okay. I'll close that public hearing. Does anyone like to move the resolution? Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
I would like to move E1 zoning ordinance text amendment, file number ZOTA 254, cluster square footage, as printed in the agenda.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, supported by Councilmember Abraham, that we approve E1 zoning ordinance text amendment, file number ZOTA 254, cluster square footage as printed in the agenda packet. Discussion from council. Councilmember Hamilton.
Yeah, I'll just mention briefly that to me, the question is it worth incentivizing 1,500 to 1,900 homes? And the answer to me is yes. It's clear that 1,500 was only getting 15% of units. I think it would be valuable to have more 19 to 15 compared to what is coming out of the clusters, and so I'll support this because I think it's worth it, and we'll keep tabs on it. We'll see how it goes and see what happens with this, but I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Any other discussion? Councilmember Abraham.
Thank you, Mayor. The cluster ordinance, two of the primary reasons it was developed was to promote two things. Preservation of green space, which we know based off of resident surveys is a very important thing, and you get that preservation that you would not get when you build by right. And so that is one of, I'll say, two stated goals for that cluster development. The other is to get smaller housing stock. As Brent indicated, in our follow-up questions, the average size home in Troy is about 3,000 square feet, which means we have homes that are much larger than that because that is the average. What I do get concerned about, though, is with the additional density bonuses, it means the lot sizes get smaller. And we've seen in some of these cluster developments, some of the houses are 3,500 square feet. And now the land has gotten smaller. So you've got houses, while on paper, we understand the density, in practicality, in some ways it feels like it almost negates the density bonus and the open space that's gotten preserved. And it leads to perceptions or maybe even misperceptions on what a cluster does. And I think a few of us that have been on council for a while are very cognizant of people who have expressed concerns about the cluster development based on what they hear on Nextdoor or based on perceptions, which may or may not be the reality. I think there are some cluster projects we may have rethought if we knew, if we had the hindsight, being 2020. Councilmember Hamilton stated really positively, is the density bonus worth it for that additional space? I probably can't state it quite as positively as Councilmember Hamilton. This is one that I still struggle with. I continue to hear we don't have smaller homes. And at the same time, I can appreciate what the builders say where people hesitate to actually sign on the line despite them loving the ranch model home that they've been through. And so, I struggle with, is this the right mechanism to drive in that smaller housing stock? Are we adjusting our policy to fit what builders want to do? Or can we drive a policy that might shift their way of doing business? And Brent, to your point, we've had this cluster ordinance in place for 4 or 5 years, and that hasn't happened yet. So I look forward to hearing some of my other colleagues' comments on the matter, because at this point, I have a slight leaning. Most people probably can't guess what it is, but I'd like to have a little bit more discussion, or look forward to hearing additional comments potentially.
Thank you, Councilmember Abraham. Additional council comments, discussion? Councilmember Hoderick?
Councilwoman Abraham, I appreciate that you want to kind of kick this around a tiny bit here, it sounds like. I'm one of the older ones on council and have friends that have been selling homes and moving into condos or smaller homes. And personally, what I'm hearing and sensing and feeling in terms of the 1,500 square feet, first of all, developers, they're just not going to come in and build those. That's not what they're creating. That's not where they are. Is the bottom line of what I heard Mr. Savident talking about. It's just not being brought to us, no matter how much, and I know you do bring it up to them when they come in. This has been a discussion for a number of years because we do have residents asking us to try to get this kind of housing stock. On the other side of it, too, is people that I know that have moved, end out leaving Troy, and they're not moving into 1,500. They're downsizing, but they're not downsizing down to 1,500. That it's almost too much of a downsize to go down to 1,500. I don't have a heart attack from that before the meeting's over. I know it can't be helped. I'm not complaining, but I'm sorry if I keep jumping. It just does really frighten me. I miss my quiet office at home with my kitty climbing across the desk, I guess. But the reality is, we're saying we want to bring 1,500 square feet to people, and it's anecdotal, and I'm giving you qualitative feedback, but, part of our job is to try to do our best to represent residents and what we're hearing and seeing. And, if it helps you a bit, I did sense checking, and it's like, well, the reality is 1,500 square feet is a little bit too small. So it could be that with this change, we would both incentivize developers to bring in another housing option, maybe slightly bigger than we originally intended, and it would also meet the needs better where people would be signing on the bottom line. And that's sometimes it's just a sense that you have to have as you try to make these decisions. And that's where my head is coming out in terms of, at first I saw it going up to 1,900 and I paused. I went back and watched the Planning Commission discussion on this, thought about it, and then just, talked to some folks, and that's kind of where I'm coming out, if that helps you at all.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. Additional council discussion? Anyone besides David, since he's already gone? Following the rules. I do have a couple. I'm going to go and then I'll give you another opportunity. So I was on council with Edna and Ellen when the cluster ordinance came into existence. And it was really brought into existence after the tree preservation ordinance came first. And it was a way to say, residents, we hear you. The first step is the tree preservation needed to take place because too much green space was being torn down. But we don't want to stop development in Troy, and we want to make it easier for developers to have still an option to build and hopefully work together to keep green space as well. I had high hopes that the 1,500 square foot option would be another solution to, or that idea, that concept where we were hearing constantly, I have no place to move, I have no place to downsize. So let's try to work all that together and have it work out into some great incentivizing thing. It hasn't worked as is. I think that's pretty clear, which is unfortunate. And I've asked 2 or 3 different developers during different projects who have come before us over the past few years, why aren't you building these small ranch homes? And they all say the same thing: the market's just not there. I offer it, people end up wanting something different. And so when I hear Councilmember Abraham talk about this tonight, something resonated when she said, you see these 35 square foot homes being built on these tiny little yards. And it suddenly does appear like Troy's cluster ordinance is just encouraging McMansions, but more of them in a smaller space. And that is certainly not the intent, but it is how it looks quite often. And I know we've had some issues. I think it's the Parkview on Beach development where those houses are so big on those lots they can't do what they need to do as far as decks in the back, and they're trying to get variances now. So there's definitely been some some growing pains, for lack of a better term, with that. I'm very curious, I recognize our planning commission recommended this, which I do take great stock in. I think that's the appropriate course is for it to go before them. They've had the public hearings, although it's been a little bit of time now. But I'm curious what makes us think that 1,900 square feet now is going to be give the big movement and the increase in those types of first floor master homes that 1,500 didn't. When you look at the projects that were approved under the cluster ordinance, the very basement bottom amount, there's been a couple there's an 1,800 square feet, but they're usually substantially larger. And the Midtown Crossing, that is encouraging to hear, Brent, that people are really interested in it, and I can understand why that is. But I share in Councilmember Abraham's concerns and questioning. I'm reasonably confident that we need to do this at this point to at least try it out. We've gone this far with it. Our planning commission's recommended it, and I think it's a good step into trying to see if it makes a difference. But I would love to see a different approach maybe to the incentivizing, because it doesn't seem to be working as is, and I don't know what that is. And maybe we have some turnover in planning commission. Maybe there's some different things that can come out of that body. But I do want to, again, to the public, this is not about building big houses on small lots. That's not the point of the cluster. The point of the cluster really is a green space preservation ordinance. I think it was Planning Commissioner Lambert who said that to me long before he was on Planning Commission. He says, you should rename it. Instead of cluster ordinance, call it a green space preservation ordinance, because that is the big intent behind it. I'm sure everything I just said back and forth, Edna, gave you no indication either way. But I do think it's important to recognize that I recognize at least that it's not having its desired effect. I do have some reservations about whether these changes are actually going to increase that. I'm willing to give it a continued shot, but I'd like to keep working to try to find out what's going to make it work as we get smaller and smaller inventory of property that can even be an option. So I know Councilmember Hamilton, you had additional discussion. I'll turn it back over to you.
Sure, Mayor, thank you. Right, I think one thing that makes me lean towards supporting it is that still, even when they provide a cluster plan, it still has to go through Planning Commission. It still has to come to the City Council. We can look at it and say, this isn't what we had in mind, and deny it still. I mean, just because that didn't scare me as much.
I guess that means I want you to stop, David. I guess that means you're cut off.
But to me, this doesn't mean that they're going to be able to do this without further, going through Planning Commission and going through us again and more analysis. And it's nice to, if they do want to produce 1,500 to 1,900 homes, it gives them an incentive to, as you said, preserve the green space. Because as Brent mentioned earlier, to do this at all, you have to at least do the 20% open space. And so if developers were building 1,500 to 1,900 elsewhere without doing the cluster option, they wouldn't have to do that. So I think for those two reasons, it's worth it to me. But I understand the points that Councilmember Abraham and Mayor Baker made. Whatever we can do to incentivize the smaller homes, and maybe there's an option to limit the max size. I know that's not going to be something we'll do here, and that would be a long ordinance amendment process, but is there some way to say the point of the cluster ordinance wasn't, or the green space ordinance, or whatever we call it, wasn't to make 3,000 homes on tiny lots, and maybe we can tweak it that way. I don't know if that's been discussed with Planning Commission, but maybe that's an option as well. But to me, that's not relevant to the discussion today, but it's something I'm interested in. That's it.
Thank you. Additional council discussion? It's a good thing these aren't mirrors, because I'd be the reflection is really strange, everybody. I'm sorry to. All right, the vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Krenga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Motion carries. Next on the agenda is E2, zoning ordinance text amendment, file number ZOTA-255, transitions in NN Neighborhood Node Zoning District. This will also be introduced by Community Development Director Brent Savanah. Brent?
Thank you again, Mayor Baker. Just waiting for the PowerPoint to come up.
I don't know if it's possible to turn this podium mic up just a little bit. It seems quieter than everybody else's. Maybe it's just me. I don't know, maybe it's the plexiglass, but it's hard to hear. And I'm afraid with public comment from somebody else. Thank you. Now it'll probably be too loud. But
We have a clicker.
we just need the
I just need
presentation.
a PowerPoint now.
Presentation.
We're getting back used to this again after 15 months.
Got to be careful with the laser, though. If I hit I might blind myself. Nope. It's the first one. I was
go
item
back.
1 and item 2. It's about halfway down. It starts. The slide's gonna look like, there you go, that one there. Great, thank you. So again, another text amendment, same process as I outlined earlier. Oh, I got a point over there, don't I?
Uh-oh.
There we go. So this involves an amendment to the neighborhood node provisions. So the first question that pops to mind, what is a neighborhood node? It's a concept that was enacted as policy, as development policy, when we did a comprehensive rewrite of the master plan in 2008. And it really was a spin-off, for those of you who remember in 2005 when we did the Vision 2020 visioning exercise, which is a really wide-ranging, very successful visioning exercise that was conducted in the city. Where this notion of mixed use and creating neighborhoods and creating walkability, et cetera, came from. So it was really, it germinated from that into the concept that was included in 2008 master plan. And what the master plan does is you can see, it's hard to see, but it's the baby blue circles at the location of major intersections throughout the city. There's 21 of them. They're labeled A through U, and each node was created based on its the intersection's particular use and particular character. And there's a description of each one of the nodes in the master plan that talks about the character and what we're trying to achieve with each of the nodes. And the vision for these nodes, I'm just going to hit on some of the things that we try to achieve. We wanted to try to achieve a mix of uses, create neighborhood gathering spaces at these intersections. We wanted to try to accommodate the daily needs of residents, and at the same time as all this, we try to ensure that the predominant use in each node was in keeping with the characteristics of the node. So that was the improvements were contextual. And we implemented this policy through our zoning law. Again, the master plan is policy and the zoning ordinance is law. And we carried over all 21 nodes at the 21 intersections. But this is a really important bullet point up here. 20 of these things abut single-family residential. And change at these areas where there's points of friction is difficult. It's difficult for everybody concerned. So that one of the provisions, the provision of the ordinance, section 506, that deals with neighborhood nodes, I talked about balance earlier, and this kind of speaks to the balance that we're trying to achieve. We talk about it in the zoning ordinance that these nodes should be visually distinguished because of their greater intensity, density, and design. And then we talk about using various design techniques like variation of building height to help separate the node from the surrounding area. So we're trying to differentiate the node. But then you look at the final point where we also want to respect adjacent neighborhoods. So it's not too overpowering, not too extreme. So we get back to this balance again, and that's the challenge, that's the rub when we deal with the neighborhood nodes. So we've got some examples here of neighborhood nodes that some projects, and all of these abut either single family or two family residential, and all of them, you know, if depending on who you speak to, may or may not be impact on the neighbors. So there's generally 4 issues that we hear from residents when it comes to neighborhood node applications. Traffic, and we really heard it the last 4 or 5 years with the improvements that we've seen on I-75, because it's like whatever you call it, the Doppler effect or whatever, but the traffic's got to go somewhere, and it goes on Crooks and it goes on all these other roads, plus combination with Big Beaver. So we hear about traffic all the time. Density, to many it's a dirty word. In suburban communities, density is a bad word. And these, you saw the provisions, it's literally calls for increased density in the nodes. And the last 2, height and buffer transition, and these are the 2 that we're proposing to address with this text amendment: height and buffer transition. So let's talk about height. So presently, in the neighborhood node district, a developer could build a 5-story maximum building in the nodes. Now, it needs to be couched a little bit. There are compatibility standards that are subjective that the Planning Commission can and will apply to speak to this balance that we talked about. But again, it's subjective, and we could afford more protection to these abutting single-family neighborhoods, which comes to the proposed amendment. What the proposed amendment does is reduces maximum height to 3 stories or 38 feet in the neighborhood node district across the board, and it reduces maximum height to 2.5 stories or 30 feet when abutting one-family residential. So 2.5 stories, 30 feet is the same height as single-family homes in Troy. So it brings the height down to similar as the neighborhood that's abutting. And the other issue that's addressed is buffer transition. So presently there's no side yard setback requirement in the neighborhood nodes, and there's no green belt requirement. There are rear yard requirements, and they're generally comparable to single family residential, but the side yard setback is not addressed. And again, there are compatibility requirements in there that are subjective that can be applied by the Planning Commission on a case-by-case basis. But again, that subjectivity word. So the Planning Commission thought it was a good idea to have more protection that was clearly delineated in the zoning ordinance. Also, when a neighborhood node is abutting a single-family residential, the building setback shall be no less than the height of the building or 20 feet, whichever is greater. Again, it gets back to this balance and the context and the scale for the developments when next to single-family residential. Furthermore, when a project is abutting single-family residential, a minimum 20-foot wide landscape green belt shall be provided and maintained. And finally, buildings shall be oriented in such a way as to minimize the impact on abutting residential users. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on this item December 10th, 2019. They recommended approval 9-0, and I should have added one more slide that just kind of occurred to me as I started my presentation. We have started the master plan update process, and we've talked about one of the focuses of our efforts will be the neighborhood nodes. We are going to analyze these properties, this zoning district. We're going to really focus on it. I would call this effort make a text amendment, to consider a text amendment this evening as somewhat of a stopgap, because we're going to take a deep dive and give this further study. So, and now I can answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Brent. Again, the educational component, and I think that's valuable. It's unfortunate that you had to talk about cluster and neighborhood node in the same night. Well, welcome back, everybody. Wow. Questions from council. I know some were asked already beforehand, and those are part of they're on our website, the questions and answers. But Councilmember Hoderick, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Zevedent, I asked a question today, and I still need you to talk to me like I'm in kindergarten, if you would. Because this is really, our residents really are counting on us to help with this stopgap. They're being patient while we get to the master plan, and this is consequential tonight, I think, both for developers and our residents, and I really appreciate the effort planning and you folks put into this. And I don't want to blow it. You know, it's our opportunity to make sure for the moment that we get this right. The buffer, the landscape buffer, 20 feet of this space would include a landscape buffer. Is that 20 feet additional to the setbacks that are described, or is that 20 feet within the setback footage?
The latter, 20 feet within the setback. Now if I could piggyback on that, the landscape provisions of the zoning ordinance subjectively allow the planning commission to also require a wall or a fence and a berm or any of the, and landscaping, any of those in combination. So it could be a landscape buffer with a wall and a fence on top of a berm, in theory, if the planning commission has the authority on a case-by-case basis to require the developer to propose that.
Okay.
No, please.
Do you all mind if I?
Go ahead.
So if the property is in the node and there's residential, if right here it was just going to be residential homes built, the setbacks would be 45 feet of the existing, and an R1B would be 45 feet. If I'm going to build a home behind my home, let's say one didn't exist, there would need to be 45 plus 45 between the homes, correct?
Depends if it's a
single-family residential.
If it's a side yard, the setback would be at least equal to, it would be a minimum of 20 feet, but it would be equal to a minimum of 20 feet or the height of the building, whichever's greater. So my guess is we're probably going to see 30-foot high buildings similar to a single-family home. So it's a 30-foot setback, and of that 30 feet, 20% has to be a landscape buffer. That's fairly significant. I mean, it requires staggered evergreen trees at a minimum height, plus potentially on top of a berm, potentially with a wall or a fence. So that the 20% was a minimum. It was addressing the fact that the side yard setback is NA, like it's not applicable for the node. So it's a minimum starting point.
So I'm talking back door to back door.
Yeah,
You're talking side.
Well, yeah. Well, I didn't add that component. So if there's a rear yard on the single-family residential property, and let's say it's R1A or R1B, which is our largest rear yard setbacks, 45 feet. It'll be 45 feet from the back of the house to the property line. Then, depending on how high the building is, it could potentially be another 30 feet minimum. That's bare minimum. And again, subjectivity. There are compatibility standards that are subjective that the Planning Commission can apply to get a better transition between the project and single-family residential. Now, it's got to be reasonable. It's got to address the issue that it's trying to correct. I mean, it's got to make sense. Rough proportionality, rational nexus. It's a planning term. It's got to be defendable, but there are other compatibility standards in addition to this step that's proposed to ensure that transition.
I'm just struggling a little bit with, it doesn't seem like enough feet.
Ellen, I think what she's initially asking is, if it was two R1B properties, not a neighborhood node property, and you had them back to back, there would be 45 feet on one, and then wouldn't there need to be another 45 feet if it was the backyard of another?
If it was the same zoning district, yes, but there would not be a requirement for that buffer.
Right, but it would be 90 feet.
Yes,
Yeah, I'm looking at the feet total.
yeah.
And I feel like it should at least equal, because it's a different kind of housing, the spacing should be at least as great as what would be true, and I can't speak planning speak, so, and speaking like a resident, you know, if that much is required of compatible housing stock, of similar district, that we're now talking about in a node, this is essentially a different district, different kind of housing, multifamily housing. It doesn't make sense to a person living here that the number of feet in between would be less than what would be required from similar housing behind my housing. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do, I understand, yes.
And it's why they come in with pitchforks and torches, because, and the developers come in and they look at the feet and they spend money doing their plans because, you know, it's meeting our ordinance. And then I think that is part of that tension that doesn't make sense to residents. And frankly, you know, speaking honestly with you, and I always do, it does not make sense to me that would be the case. So I guess I'm looking, and maybe some other council members have, to me it should be total with some green space stuff in there too, the trees and what have you. It should equal at least the distance that we would require between two residential houses, the R1A and R1B that you described, the 45 feet. I want it to total at least 90. And technically in my head, because it is a different district and different kind of housing, it feels different, it looks different, it's a whole different neighborhood. You know, I would argue I would even want more, but I would at least want it to be that minimum. And that's just kind of, I'll welcome the comments from my fellow council people. That's where my head is spinning here, and what I would like to ask for tonight.
I see City Manager Miller wanted to speak. Go ahead, City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a complex issue, and I'm not trying to complicate things. And Brent, you can take this after my initial comment. So the example that you're presenting, I understand, is R1A or R1B, and the two homes would have 90 feet. Those homes are called principal structures. However, each of those homes would be allowed, I think, up to 2 accessory structures in that 40-foot area, up to 3 feet from the property line.
Oh, I see.
So I'm just adding a fact that it doesn't say that nothing can go in there. They could build a garage, a sauna, whatever, as an accessory structure. Is that correct, Mr. Sabanet?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's 6 feet off memory, but your point is, the point is they can get relatively close to that property line.
Not the principal structure,
Right.
the accessory structures.
Okay. I hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
Additional questions? Councilmember Hamilton?
Thank you, Mayor. I think I know the answer to this, but I just want to clarify and ask it for residents. So this would only apply to future developments, right? Because older developments fall under non-conforming use, and so they wouldn't have to add the green belt or anything like that.
Yeah, and it wouldn't apply to developments that are currently being processed.
Pending, right, yeah.
Yeah, pending.
Great, thank you.
Additional, Councilmember Hamilton.
Abraham?
I'm sorry, Abraham. I can see his reflection. I'm telling you, it's more intense than you realize. So.
It's pretty bad.
Yeah, it is.
The reflection is real for those watching in the
Kurt, we need some kind of film or something.
So we've talked a lot about the landscape buffer. Is there a uniform definition of what a landscape buffer may be? I know you'd mentioned, you know, is it evergreen, staggered, 20 feet, 30 feet tall? Is it shrubbery? Is it something in between? Is there a standard definition so that if this were to get approved tonight and there are new developments being considered, that residents can say, well, maybe if it's not the distance that I think it is, I'll have these really tall trees that block sound and view. So if you can,
Yeah,
maybe provide a little bit more context or definition.
There are minimum standards for these buffers in the zoning ordinance. Again, it involves staggered evergreen trees, so they maintain their foliage, their needles year-long to provide that screen. They're staggered, so it reduces the gaps between the evergreens. There's a few options available, but again, they are evergreen trees.
Evergreen options,
Yes.
essentially.
Yes, that are clearly defined in the zoning ordinance. I just haven't got them memorized.
That's good enough for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions?
Mayor
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. I have more of a comment than really a question, but first of all, thank you very much, Brent, for the presentations.
Should we hold comments to discussion, or is it something,
okay,
does it need a response? I mean, I'm trying to get back on protocol here. I want to hear what you have to say.
I'll hold
But
it.
if it's a comment, then let's try to.
I'll hold it.
All right, fair enough. I appreciate it. You have a question, Councilmember? Let me go to Ann first, and I'll come back.
Thank you, Mayor. I got to try to remember my question. You were mentioning earlier about Planning Commission having some discretion to deviate from these. Can they deviate in the sense of requiring more of a buffer?
Yes.
So if there's a situation like Councilmember Hoderick was referring to, where you have, these really large backyards and these people are used to having a certain amount of buffer between them and neighboring residential structures, the Planning Commission could impose, say, a 30 or 40-foot setback.
That is correct.
Okay. And these setbacks would be applicable only to where the new development is abutting an existing development, or, and I'm thinking in particular of the new development going in on Square Lake in DeQuinder, where I'm already getting comments from people similar to what we got from the development at Livernois and Square Lake, where the building is very close to the road. Would this in any way impact that setback? Are these developments going to need to be a certain distance from the front of the property? Does that make sense?
Your question confused me a little bit.
Yeah, so in our neighborhood nodes, we have allowed or perhaps even encouraged a lot of these buildings to be very close to the road. I think it was actually written into the master plan, the idea of having, if I remember correctly, it goes back to the idea of having walkable neighborhoods.
We require it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So this wouldn't then shift that backwards. We're still going to have these developments similar to the one at Livernois and Square Lake and the one at Square Lake and DeQuinder.
Yeah. What we're specifically focused on with this proposed amendment is the relationship between the property and the single-family residential neighborhoods that abut.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Can I address?
Sure.
Councilmember Hoderick's comment. The concept you proposed is comparable to the cluster development, where we call it a perimeter setback, where we talk about the relationship between the cluster development on those sides that abut the single-family residential. And there's, going off the top of my head, I'm again going off memory, it's either 40-foot minimum, or it has to mirror the abutting rear yards. So it's comparable. The reason for the difference, again, I think that the fact that there's a landscape buffer proposed played a part in that. But as I indicated in terms of process, the authority for approving these proposed amendments lays on City Council. So you have options with this if you want to do something different.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilmember Chamberlain-Crankett?
Yes, just real quick. So I listened with great intent to what Councilmember Hoderick shared, your history and what you've heard from residents. I think what I have heard is that general sense of frustration around those nodes. Not so much that residents know what the answer is. It does sound like this is a good step in the right direction. But the question is what Councilmember Hoderick shared about this concern, there's not enough space between the developments and say those homes and those neighborhoods. Is this something whereby if approved tonight and more research went into the master plan, that later in time that we could amend it further if needed? Is that a possibility if the spacing issue is not enough? I understand that Planning Commission does have some discretion around that space. So that is a way to address it.
Yeah, so again, I referenced earlier, this is a stopgap because it makes something better. Now, if council feels that it's not exactly what the majority of city council wants, you could send it back, you could change it tonight. We call that designing at the table, not my favorite thing in the world. But we could certainly, you could certainly send it back to Planning Commission for further consideration. But again, this is a stopgap to make something better. We're gonna roll up our sleeves and really focus on the neighborhood nodes. But your point is well taken regarding the distancing. Again, it gets back to this balance. But I hear the neighbors, and it's difficult.
Councilmember Hoderick, another question?
Yeah, so let's say I negotiated 10 more feet, for example. We can't, that would have to go back to Planning Commission for their approval to add the 10 feet in, or can we amend what's being brought to us tonight to add the feet?
City Attorney Bloom? Again, welcome back.
So your question is whether or not they, I think your question is, do you have the authority to make the changes, or is that a Planning Commission authority to make the changes?
Can I amend what they recommended and it would end up being our ordinance tonight, or would?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you amend the ordinance language on the table?
Yes.
Yes. You can do that. As Mr. Savedant has stated, sometimes it's more helpful to really think about it because there may be unintended consequences with any change, but you absolutely have the ability to amend it. You do not have to accept it as recommended by the Planning Commission.
And I hear your caution about designing at the table. I'm not doing this lightly, having this conversation lightly, so.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, go ahead. You have a question, go ahead. Yeah.
So essentially, this is a stopgap until we really reevaluate the master plan, essentially.
Correct.
And make those changes more permanent.
Yes, and I think, again, it's going to be a deep dive into the neighborhood nodes. Staff has heard the residents. I know council has heard the residents. It's finding the balance, and it's case by case basis. It can be difficult.
I have a question, Brent. It's not always 20 feet. If it's a 30-story structure, then it would be 30 feet, right?
If it's a 2.5-story, it's probably going to be at 30 feet. So the minimum would be a 30-foot setback. Yes.
But the buffer itself, I'm thrilled with the height reduction. 5 stories sounds terrifying. I don't think we have any 5-story structures in neighborhood nodes. So I think going down to that 2.5 stories is really a good thing. Yeah. My question comes, again, just a little bit, if you could talk a little bit more about what the Planning Commission authority could be. If you've got a single family house that's lived next to an undeveloped property for a long time, and they've got a backyard, and then suddenly there's a 2.5-story multi-family residential with a balcony that looks down into their backyard. There's really not a buffer that can be done to protect against that. Is that correct?
The trees, the minimum height of the trees at time of planning would not afford. I've got a 50-foot high spruce tree in front of my house, but that's 30 years old. Right. at time of planning, it's not going to be able to, if someone's on the second floor of a building looking directly across, that tree at planning is not going to afford the screening. Now, that being said, depending on the zoning district, there could be a single-family home that's built at 30 feet that, if it's R1E to R1E, it's a 35-foot setback. So, from the potential of someone looking out the window to the neighbors, it's the same. But the difference is there's the density difference in the massing. You're going to have more windows that look to the neighbors.
It could also be the back of a storage facility, right, that they're looking at from their backyard. And I know we're deeper into this neighborhood node conversation than that's before us tonight, but just as a reminder to all of council that there are a lot, and the residents, there are a lot of issues that we need to address with this. And I think the question Mayor Pro Tem Brooks just asked, again, this, and reiterating, this is a stopgap measure, but there is a lot more to be discussed about these. And we're all for that, right?
Yeah, and one thing, if I could piggyback onto your comments, Mayor Baker, I mentioned there's 4 issues that we hear a lot about. We hear a lot about traffic. We also hear a lot about density. When you reduce the height to 2 stories, you reduce the traffic and you reduce the density by definition. So this amendment really does hit on all 4 of the issues that we talked about. Now, I'm hearing from at least one council member, and very plainly that the distance could be greater. That's a reasonable comment.
City Attorney Bloom?
Yeah, Mayor, I just really wanted to clarify my earlier statement now that I figured out what Councilwoman Hoderick was asking. I just wanted to make sure that you knew that you could continue the public hearing if you were not ready and prepared to adopt the language as proposed. You could do that without it having to go back to the Planning Commission. So that is another option that you could potentially have. Or again, you can make changes from the table additionally. So hopefully that clarifies.
If we were to make changes tonight from the table, which I recognize how you both feel about that, those don't need to go back to Planning Commission, though? Okay, that's good. Thank you. Councilmember Abraham.
Follow-up question for City Attorney Bloom. If we hold open the public hearing, is there a date certain that we need to bring it back to council, or can it be open indefinitely? I'm just trying to get a little clarity around that.
It could be open indefinitely, but you would not have the limit of the 2.5 stories if you kept it out there. So as long as it is the way it is, there may be developments that come in the meantime, and they would be able to develop under the ordinance as it is existing.
Thank you.
That just opened up a really wonderful question that you're going to love. I love the height portion of it, the height reduction, right? That's the easy one for me. If that was reduced tonight without the setback issue addressed, what would exist left to guide that setback? Do you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Do you have an answer to that?
The Planning Commission in the past, for certain projects in the neighborhood node, have applied compatibility requirements that has affected the development. I'm trying to be as vague as I can.
That helps, Brent.
I'm trying to not specifically color a particular project.
I understand. I understand the risk and all of that as well. I guess my concern is when I'm looking at the language as it exists now versus what we're trying to change, I guess I don't fully understand what that would do. Other than compatibility, which I understand where you're coming from there. I'll sit on that for a minute, I guess.
Mayor, sorry.
No, go ahead, if you had.
Sure, I was just going to say that the Planning Commission discussion, as I recall, the height was kind of a no-brainer. They were on the same page. The height was a no-brainer, and we had more discussion on the setback. It's more difficult to kind of wrap your head around.
Thank you. Councilmember Erickson Gall?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. What is the existing setback?
There is no side yard setback requirement in the node.
No side yard and no rear?
There's a rear yard requirement, but not a side yard requirement.
what is the rear yard requirement?
Depending on the building form, it's, I think the least is 30, and some are 40, I believe.
And the compatibility aspect is the compatibility standard is what is used currently for the side setback.
It's still there, yes.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm confused. So we're reducing the setback?
No, we're not changing the rear yard setback, we're changing the side yard setback, and we're strengthening that requirement, that transition requirement.
Okay, got to think on this for a while.
Do you see why I said, please talk to me like I'm in kindergarten?
Because I guess where I'm confused is that we're talking about the proposed language would apply to all sides, obviously not the front, but both the side and the rear setback? No, okay. This is not changing the side.
It is changing the side. It's requiring a landscape buffer on a minimum 20 feet when it abuts single-family residential, whether it's a rear or a side.
Okay.
And it's requiring a minimum setback on all sides, regardless of what it is, of at least 20 feet or the height of the building, whichever's greater.
Okay, so, but currently somebody could, if somebody was building that lovely 5-story building, they would have a 30 to 40 foot rear setback.
Right.
So why are we reducing it? Why are we not reducing it? It seems like we're reducing the rear setback.
We're increasing the side setback.
We're increasing the side setback.
And strengthening the rear setback by requiring a landscape buffer, specifically requiring a 20-foot landscape buffer.
All right.
Clear as mud.
Well, but I am, I'll save it for comments. Thank you.
I'm just wondering that now that everyone's watching, that we clearly look more confused than we were when we started, and I don't feel extra comfortable about making legislative decisions as it relates to zoning text when we seem to have this confusion. So unless we can get the confused looks off our faces in the next few minutes, unfortunately, it might be better to readdress it at the next meeting and continue the public hearing. But so maybe we can address that last question, which I think then the last couple of questions caught me a little bit off guard, and clearly Councilmember Erickson Galt as well. And I understand there's a lot of nuance related, and there's a lot of things, and we understand the height reduction is a great thing that no one seems to have any issue with. We're codifying in the zoning text a set side setback of 20 feet, because that doesn't currently exist right now, and it's just left up to a subjective compatibility standard. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So we're putting something in writing that makes it clearer for both developers and residents what that side setback should be, which is a good thing for all.
Yes.
Okay. The rear setback, right now as it exists, you said it's 30 to 40 feet, depending on the type of building.
Yes.
If we reduce the building to 2.5 stories, does that 30 to 40 feet still stand, or does it get?
Still stands.
It still stands. And it includes the requirement of a 20-foot buffer?
Yes.
In the rear as well?
Yes.
Ann, did that help?
Yes, I'm understanding better now. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to open the public hearing. No one has signed up to speak specifically on this that's here present. Is anyone in the audience? Mr. Mursh, you want to come forward? Go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
I'll take about a minute. My name is Dale Mursh. I've lived here since 1988. We bought our house in Troy because we like it here and we like the neighborhoods and stuff. And this neighborhood nodes thing is like putting a Starbucks on every corner maybe. And we've got plenty of 7-Elevens and they built one. They replaced a house near my house with a 7-Eleven, and I've never been there. There's plenty of shopping and Starbucks and you name it in Troy already. All this seems to be help the developers make more money and the city more tax money. In the last election, there was a 2-to-1 margin against the 3 development ticket, and I think you ought to remember that when you're considering changes. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mersch. Starbucks cup aside, I appreciate your comments. City Clerk Dick, anyone else in the audience like to speak on this item? Sir, go ahead and come forward.
My name is Mukesh Mangla, 4516 Rochester Road. I have looked at that master plan, and I think there was a lot of intelligent people who worked on it, and 100 pages, and I read it very carefully. And I think most emphasis that Mr. Swanat and Ben, our consultant, they had put on it was these notes. That's what really was making the city, come up, from a regular city. And these nodes are very special nodes, and half of them are already developed. And there's only very few parcels that come within that 1,000 feet of the circle that is drawn. Only a few. Now, all these restrictions, in my opinion, being an engineer, I see that if those restrictions are put on, the development won't happen in that 1,000 feet, because 500 feet is already taken by some other development. There's about 400 or 500 feet left, 2-3 parcels together. If one parcel has to be a buffer totally for the people, it's not going to be as effective as what the city and what the consultant really wanted to make. And, like the pictures that they have shown, the vision that they had about these notes, 4-story, to make it look like a really small downtown walkable thing. And if all these buffers, on top of 30 feet, you have another 20 feet landscape buffer and all this stuff, it's I think economically won't become feasible. And in my opinion, layout-wise, it's not going to have the same kind of an impact that all the people that worked on it, 5 years ago that had. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comments. Anyone else in the audience like to speak on this issue? City Clerk Dixon, is there anybody online for E2?
If anyone on Zoom wants to speak on item E2, please raise your hand. No one's raised their hand.
It's very space age, I'm telling you. I appreciate it. Okay, well, I'll close the public hearing then. Would anyone like to put the resolution on the table to have council discussion? Councilmember Hamilton.
I'll move E2 zoning ordinance text amendment, file number ZOTA 255, transitions in NN neighborhood known zoning district as printed in the agenda packet.
Support.
Is that in?
Yeah.
Okay, moved by Councilmember Hamilton, supported by Councilmember Erickson Galt, that we approve E2 zoning ordinance text amendment, file number ZOTA 255, transitions in NN neighborhood node zoning district as printed in the agenda packet. Discussion, Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, I won't go back to you first because I shut you down earlier. But.
No, it's fine. Thank you, Mayor. My comment was basically that I really appreciate planning really trying to address these concerns that residents are having and trying to do what they can to come up with some solutions because this is a big issue. And I'm glad that we are focusing on the neighborhood nodes. I just would like to see also some of these issues with compatibility have been outside of just the neighborhood nodes. We've had issues on the Big Beaver corridor with Alpine and McClure and other areas. So I do hope that when we are looking at the master plan and reevaluating the master plan, we don't just focus on neighborhood nodes, but also really look at other areas where this is also an issue.
Thank you. It's a good comment. Additional council discussion? Councilmember Hoderick.
So I really do appreciate the discussion we had on the setbacks and the buffer, and I want to guard against doing something capriciously here that could snake us up. I understand how that can happen. I've been around long enough to know to be cautious. And I also think it's critical that we do take action, a stopgap for this moment, recognizing that, this summer and into the fall, it's not like we're talking 2 years from now that we're looking at the master plan. That is our next step. The discussion we had tonight can hopefully help lead into that discussion. And so I, kind of wanted to fight for 10 feet, I'm not sure that is the prudent thing to do tonight. I also don't want to delay. And I think addressing that setback and the height, it is a step we need to take tonight. I think we should do that cleanly. And then, our master plan and our planning documents, it is a finessing. To the gentleman's point about, we don't want to completely divert developers away in frustration. We're trying to manage this tension, and it's a living document. It's an ongoing process, and this is how that sausage is made. I do really believe the buffer, needs to be on the to-do list as we go into that master plan. But I like the idea of the stopgap tonight and then moving forward. That's kind of where my head wrestled around as we had this discussion, and I appreciate the time everybody took on it. And I appreciate what you all did to bring this. We are all hearing. We've had a joint meeting with planning. I think that was one of the last things we all did together before COVID hit, and it was such a constructive meeting. Our residents and developers need to know that we're looking at this from all angles and trying to make it a win-win as best you can. There's always going to be tensions, but we can sense and we know there's a tilt here that we need to address, and this is a great first step. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Hoderick. Councilmember Abraham?
Thank you, Mayor. Past 2 years in particular, maybe 4 years, there's been a lot of consternation about development and how it fits into the city. And the neighborhood node has been the latest variant on that consternation, in particular because of some proposed developments in recent months and years. And it's not that council, or at least I'll speak for myself, I wouldn't characterize myself as anti-development. What I would characterize myself is having development that fits within the city and fits within the neighborhood, so that both parties, neighbors and developers and builders, all benefit from it. And that consternation we've really been hearing over the past 2 years is that the perception is that the benefits are one-sided. And so, like Councilwoman Hoderick said, I think we need to act on something tonight. I think we can't leave this as an open question. We clearly have heard from residents that the neighborhood node as defined right now is not working. And at the same time, we've clearly heard from developers that the neighborhood node as designed is not working for them either, because they'll spend a lot of time, effort, money developing plans, having iterative conversations with the neighbors that really don't move the needle very much, and it's a frustrating experience for everyone, neighbors and builders alike. I do share some of the same concerns that Councilmember Hoderick has articulated about setbacks. But when I think about where we are today and what this stopgap proposal would do, I have to think through, are we better off if we were to approve this than we are today if we were not, and have the status quo? And I think there is sufficiency in that stopgap, in this stopgap proposal, to be in a better place than where we are today. As we go into the relook at the master plan, as we do every few years, I'm very encouraged, and I know Mr. Savidan, I know the Planning Commission are eager to address the neighborhood node, as eager as the developers, as eager as the residents. And so I think we'll end up in an even better place once we've had that dialogue and that have the Planning Commission and the planning staff come up with a really robust proposal. But in the meantime, I think this puts us in a better place than than we have been until now, and so I will be supporting this measure.
Thank you, Councilmember Abraham. Any other council discussion? Councilmember Chamberlain-Crenga.
Just to speak briefly, was it Mr. Marsh? Marsh. Thank you so much for sharing your comment today. And just to clarify in what we're talking about, and we appreciate hearing that. I think many of us who have been out talking with residents, that's exactly the sort of input we are getting in terms of concern around that development being so close to your neighborhoods, and want to invite you to take part in this master plan process. We hope that you can be a part of that. We do want to really solicit residents. What we're talking about today around this zoning ordinance amendment is not so much about limiting that sort of development that's there, but how to make it more amenable at this point as a stopgap for those neighborhoods, with the hope then, as we have a master plan discussion, and then out of that, that's just the big picture policy, and then we may need to move towards other zoning ordinances, the legal part down the road. But this is just the stopgap to hopefully improve that as we then spend the rest of the year going over that master plan, seeking to update it. And I hope that you will take part in that, because we would love to have your input, and all residents out there, all of those I've spoken to who have sensitivities around development. I'm trying to solicit them to be able to be active and to raise those voices and to find ways for both development and for our communities to work together. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Chamberlain-Crenga. Additional? Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This reminds me of the old expression, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I'm probably butchering that, but basically, or maybe even in this case, the perfect be the enemy of better. Because what we're proposing tonight is definitely not perfect. We can debate about whether it's good, but I think that overall it's definitely better than what we have now, at least for the neighbors who would be abutting any of these proposed developments. So I will be supporting this for what it is, a stopgap measure, and hopefully we'll seriously re-examine neighborhood nodes, which may have seemed like a wonderful idea at the time in 2008, and in the intervening decade or so have proved not quite as workable and ideal as the city had originally envisioned. So I'll be supporting this as something that's better than what we have, but a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Councilmember Erickson Galt. Not everybody? Can't losing track. Just real briefly, I think everybody has said a lot of what I had written down and was thinking. Mr. Marsh, to your point earlier, maybe it wasn't clear, but this actually is in line with those 2019 election priorities, and this is a step in that direction. This doesn't prevent another 7-Eleven from being built, but it does prevent a 4-story apartment building, maybe, that might not have the right compatibility with the neighborhood, at least as I understand it. Must be a very short 4-story apartment building, right, Brent? And I also, just to echo Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, and I'm sure this is the case, neighborhood nodes are extremely important in this master plan update, but we do have the Big Beaver District and some other important issues to discuss as well, and I just want to make sure that's on everybody's mind as well. So I will be supporting this as the most effective thing we can do tonight, recognizing the value and the power of that, and something that was recommended by Planning Commission in December of 2019, right after that election, Mr. Murish. So I think you've heard a lot of discussion tonight. I think the last answer that you gave us, Brent, did help me understand the setbacks a little better, so I feel good about that. And that said, I'll go ahead and ask for the vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Crenga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes. Motion carries. Next up is another public hearing, E3 rezoning request, file number Z 2019-0039, proposed Addison Heights subdivision rezoning east of Livernois, south side of Arthur, Sidwell number 88-20-27-307-033, section 27, from P, vehicular parking district, to R1E, one family residential district. And again, Community Development Director Brent Salvadon.
Thank you. So this is another amendment to the zoning ordinance. This is a map amendment, also known as a rezoning. I talked about what a zoning ordinance is, and this is similar to a text amendment. City Council is responsible for approving rezonings because it is an amendment to the zoning ordinance map, which is a legal document. And like text amendments, planning commissioners hold public hearings, make recommendations. The one difference that's fairly significant between a rezoning and a text amendment in terms of process is rezonings involve specific properties. So under state law and under our zoning ordinance, for the Planning Commission public hearing, all properties within 300 feet are to be notified by law, by mail, excuse me, by law of rezonings that are close by. So for this particular application, you see the property outlined in red. They're proposing to rezone from the P zoning district, which is vehicular parking, to R1E, one family residential. This is what we call a straight rezoning. There's no conditions that have been voluntarily submitted as part of this. There we go. This parcel is actually comprised of 2 lots from the original subdivision. It's called Addison Heights subdivision. It was platted a long time ago, and the total area of this is, the dimensions are 80 by 130. It's a vacant lot today. In terms of context, the zoning map is on the screen. You see the red. The zoning is vehicular parking, and the proposed zoning is R1E. It's shown there in red in the legend. It's going to be the same zoning district if approved as the single-family residential neighborhood to the east. The intent on the application is to construct a single-family home on the property. If it's rezoned to R1E, it could potentially be any of the uses permitted in R1 one-family residential. Again, it's a small lot. It's 80 by 130, so in all likelihood, it's going to be a single-family residential use because it's kind of dictated by the size of the area. A little bit of history. In 1986, it was originally platted to be a single-family residential lot, or actually 2 lots. It was rezoned to parking in 1986. It was going to be a parking lot. Never became a parking lot, so it's never developed. Now it's still a vacant lot, and it's the owner has decided it's time to rezone it, sell it, and build a house there. Master plan calls for this area to be single-family residential. You see the box. It's consistent with the master plan. There are a number of rezoning standards. I'm not going to read them all. They're in section 1603C. One of the most important standards is that it's consistent with the master plan, and it is. Planning Commission held a public hearing on this item January 14th, 2020. Recommended approval 9-0. The application does meet all of the rezoning standards in 16.03C, which are the standards that I didn't feel like reading. I had up on the last slide, and the Planning Department recommend approval of the application. And I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Salvadon. Any questions from council on this one? All right, well, I will open the public hearing. We do have one person signed up to speak for this public hearing, Jake Bolliard. Please come forward.
I'm close friends with the Martins, and the purpose in '85 when they bought the property was they were developing the property directly north, which was a medical facility. And since, I think 2 years ago, that property was sold, and they wanted to make sure they had adequate parking. And when they sold the property to the new owner, he did not want that property. So Mr. Martin is deceased, and Mrs. Martin's been getting calls about people wanting to, buy that for, residential. So I think it would be in the good interest of the city that we can get it back to the proper zoning and sell it and bring in tax revenues to the city. plain and simple.
Thank you, Mr. Bollier. Appreciate you coming down tonight and listening to a lot of other conversation. Anyone else in the audience like to speak on E3? City Clerk Dixon, anybody online?
Anyone on Zoom, if you'd like to speak on E3, please raise your hand. Nobody's raised their hand.
I'll close the public hearing then. Someone like to move the resolution? Councilmember Chamberlain Kranga.
I'll move E3, rezoning request, file number Z 2019-0039, proposed Addison Heights subdivision rezoning, east of Livernois, south side of Arthur, City Bill number 88202. 307033, section 27, from P, vehicular parking district to R1E, one family residential district, as printed in the agenda packet.
Support.
Moved by Councilmember Chamberlain Krianga, supported by Councilmember Hamilton, that we approve E3 rezoning request, file number Z 2019-0039, proposed Addison Heights subdivision rezoning, east of Livernois, south side of Arthur, Sidwell number 88-20-27-307-033, section 27, from P, vehicular parking district to R1E, one family residential district, as printed in the agenda packet. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Kranga.
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick.
Yes.
Mayor Baker.
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham.
Yes.
Motion carries. That concludes the public hearings this evening. My hunch is we have a good amount of public comment, and I know there's some folks waiting here to speak. Do you need 5 minutes before we get started on that process?
I could use a break.
All right, we will recess for 5 minutes. We'll be back in 5. 7 minutes, not bad. All right. All right, next up on the agenda is public comment. What am I going to say? I was going to say what I've been saying online virtually for all these months, but it's not the same. We do have 3 different options for public comment this evening. 4 different options, I guess. We have, if you're here in person, you will get to go first. I mean, if you signed up, I'll be calling you. We also have our email, which was publiccomment@troymi.gov, voicemail 248-524-3302. And we also have the ability that you can zoom in whether you're calling or coming in. City Clerk Dixon will handle that. It's my understanding, City Clerk Dixon, that we did have some emails come in after the 4 o'clock deadline. I'd like to make a motion to waive the rules to allow those and let them be read into the record this evening.
Support.
Moved by the chair, supported by Councilmember Hoderick, that we waive the rules to allow for the additional public comment emails to be read into the record, the ones that were received after 4 p.m. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Crainga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson-Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Yes.
Motion carries. We're going to do the in-person first, but then we'll get to those. So first person signed up is Kenneth Gu. Please come forward. You have 3 minutes. When you get to 1 minute left, this will turn yellow, and then when it turns red, your time will be up. Welcome.
Welcome, thank you. Good evening, or I suppose good night, to Mayor Baker, Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, and council members. My name is Kenneth Gu, and I'm currently a senior at Troy High School. I come here today to speak in support of the resolution put forth by Councilmember Erickson-Galt under agenda item L1, a resolution that opposes legislation that would restrict voting rights or that would interfere with local election clerk procedures. Basically, every year in high school, in some form or another, we're taught about how important it is to vote and how important it is to make sure that our opinions are heard in government. But as we learn these different lessons that are abstract yet still important in school, many legislators in Lansing continue to oppose legislation that would expand voting rights, as well as to basically put in place legislation that would add unnecessary roadblocks, that would put unnecessary restrictions, regulations, and red tape on these kinds of voting rights. This past election cycle, I worked on a couple campaigns, and during these campaigns, I heard from a lot of voters. And some of these voters, I basically saw them, and I saw them how they, I saw hesitant voters agree to cast a ballot when they learned how easy and accessible voting by mail was. I also heard the relief from a lot of voters when they realized that they were not going to be forced to cast unnecessarily burdening provisional ballots simply because they left their voter IDs at work or at home or at some other place. My mother, a healthcare worker, initially expressed concern to me that because of her tight schedule in and out of the office helping patients, she wouldn't be able to vote in person at the polls this year. But thanks to expanding voting rights, she and many others were able to cast their ballots, make their voices heard, and contribute to a centuries-long tradition in this U.S. Country of basically voting and making sure that our voices are heard. One that still demands great work and progress to this day. These positive voting measures expand voting access and directly impact voter participation as well as engagement in our country. Given the extraordinary lack of evidence that such measures have been abused, Michigan Senate Bills 273 through 311 are inherently undemocratic and threaten the integrity of the foundations that uphold our republic. These bills don't just undermine the lessons that we are taught in elementary, middle, and high school, they undermine our democratic systems and contribute to broader systemic issues regarding voter access. For these reasons, I oppose Senate Bills 273 and 311 and strongly support the resolution referred to this body by Councilmember Erickson-Galt. Thank you for your time today and for your continued service to this community and to the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gu. Thank you for your comments, and please thank your mom for her work in healthcare. Next up on the signed up for public comment is Barbara Yegley. And I would ask if you could turn the microphone just a little, that'll help. Yeah, thank you.
How's that?
We'll find out.
Well, okay. All right. I'm Barb Yegley. I'm a resident of Troy and a voter. And I'm actually on the opposite side as preceding. I'm urging you to reject this resolution by Councilmember Erickson-Galt, or revise it to include commendation for for election integrity. Voter access is important, not burdening Clerk Dixon is important also. But when you have a lot of mail-in ballots, there's a risk of fraud. This was brought up by the 2005 Carter-Baker Commission. Was a concern. They wrote up concerns regarding voter ID, ballot harvesting, inaccurate voter rolls. All of these things we had experiences with during the past election in November. And that strikes me as that's what they're trying to address up in Lansing. Rather than condemn our legislators for trying to ensure that we preserve voter access and election integrity, we should be encouraging them. Because I, as a citizen and a voter, am grateful to all of you for your service and to Ms. Dixon for her service and commend them for the hard work. But I think the people up in Lansing are acting in good faith to address the chaos that occurred back in November. Michigan was one of 6 states where there took a while to certify the election because of unusual things happening during the process. And nobody's trying to prevent people from being able to vote, but this is intended for voters, not for political operatives to be harvesting ballots and doing other such things. There's also, trying to address the reliability of the voting machines. This was a risk that was brought up in a 2019 NBC special where they showed how you could hack into these machines. Why was this a concern in 2019 and not in 2020 or 2021? I don't know. So let's support our legislators as they seek to tighten up the election process, restore election integrity, because regardless of what the Secretary Benson says, there's a lot of concern about what happened during the election concerning on how it was run. And I think that in order to restore public confidence, we need this legislation. So encourage the legislators, if you want to have your resolution, include something about election integrity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Yegley. Next up is Mr. Dale Murish.
Hello again. I'm Dale Murish, and I've lived here since 1988. My ankle is healed now, but the city still has too many deer, in my opinion. I did not come to talk about deer, though. I came to talk about election integrity, the election law resolution. Election integrity is an immensely important issue, as we all know. The proposed state laws are intended to prevent possible fraud for many of the emergency changes made during last year's COVID crisis. This is the state legislature's job, not the federal government, HR 1, or city or county government. The Troy City Council should focus on helping our city clerk do her usual great job maintaining free and fair elections within the boundaries of the state laws. For some issues, local control may be better since the government closest to the people usually governs best. However, we have separation of powers in our state and federal constitutions that lay out the job descriptions of each branch and level of government. In this case, the state legislatures are responsible for making election law. So let's write letters to our state representatives and senators and their leadership to influence their votes. Personally, I don't think localities should make election laws. I grew up near Chicago. Several other nearby cities were also known for their corruption. Will you someday be debating resolutions on Supreme Court cases or decisions? Should I try to get my coworkers to sign an email to Mary Barra if we don't like one of her policies? No, I think we should tell our boss and ask his advice about the best way to share our concerns. And so the city council, I believe, should not send this resolution. We can't have our city council spending time on every issue that people feel passionately about. You're already working long hours for very low pay. Keep up the good work serving the people of Troy. We appreciate it. I encourage you to vote no on this resolution regardless of your opinion on the issue. Please stay within your job description and do your part to support our constitutions. This is an issue where a letter to key legislators is proper, signing it sincerely, Ethan Baker, Mayor of Troy, or Ellen Hoderick, Troy City Council member, or Dale Murish, private citizen. Your opinion will carry far more weight than mine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murish. That concludes those that have signed up to speak for public comment in person today. I will turn it over to City Clerk Dixon, who will do what she needs to, read into the record and play voicemails.
So we'll go to Zoom next. Is there anyone signed in on Zoom who would like to speak for public comment? Please raise your hand. I'll move on to the emails. First comment is from Steve Karpowicz. Dear Council, please consider the restoration of Northfield Parkway tree lining along with the DDA request for new tree planting at the interchanges. Northfield Parkway at one time was planted with trees on both sides of the road every 45 feet or so. This planting ran the entire length of Northfield Parkway from Long Lake Road to Waddles. All the ash trees were cut down in the 2003 timeframe and never replaced. I've called the Department of Public Works and spoke with them. I've reached out to several council members personally to no avail. I ask that the trees be replanted to truly recreate the parkway as it was intended. Surely we can replace what was taken down before starting a new tree planting. Let's make the neighborhood great again. Comment 2 is from Lawrence Goodman. Hello, my name is Lawrence Goodman, and I live in the Troy Villa along with over 150 other Troy residents located between Maple and Rochester Road. Since construction started on the corner of Rochester and Big Beaver, Stevenson Highway has been backed up for about a mile, making it so that the residents can't leave or have a hard time getting home. My question is, why are orange barrels halfway down Stevenson Highway only causing panic among drivers? The first barrel starts just past the villa entrance and blocks the turnaround. And second, is there anything that can be done, such as a detour to a busier road? In the Troy Villa, there are many elderly and disabled people who can't leave now during the day due to construction. Also, many children are late being taken to school. Comment 3 is from Terry McCormick. Dear Mayor and Council, I strongly support item L1, the resolution on the agenda for the 5/24/21 meeting. As Councilmember Ann Erickson-Galt states, the citizens of Troy have spoken and spoken loudly in support of expanded voting rights and access to vote. Our state legislature has proven for well over a decade that the majority do not care what voters think. I fully expect my city council members and mayor to respect the will of the voters and the standards of democracy that we hold dear in Troy by vigorously supporting this resolution to stand in opposition of the package of voter suppression bills in Lansing. Next comment is from Lawrence Kramer. Dear Mayor and Council, Troy citizens strongly supported the VNP ballot initiative to make voting more accessible to everyone. As such, it is your duty to support the resolution brought forth by Ann Erickson-Galt opposing the package of voter suppression bills in Lansing. Next comment is from Michelle Pallas. Dear council members, first, thank you for adopting the Code of Ethics and Rules of Procedure earlier this year. Your actions set a tone of professionalism and set expectations for all of us in the community. Your service and leadership should be a model for every Michigan community looking to make good government work. Because of you, all of you, and the staff who stand with you, I am proud to be a Troy citizen. Second, I want to express my clear support for Councilmember Ann Erickson-Galt's resolution to oppose the actions being taken by the Michigan legislation to restrict voting rights and interfere with election workers. So many of us worked tirelessly to educate voters and pass Proposal 3 to promote the vote just a few years ago. We should be celebrating the amazing accomplishment of our city clerk and all of the election workers who implemented the people's will to bring Michigan up to national standards, even during a pandemic. What a feat it was to do the work so that workers could be ready and voters knew the changes that made voting safe during a pandemic and even more secure than ever. We cannot and should not sit silent and allow these actions to chip away at our democracy. Next comment is from Elizabeth Harris. Ladies and gentlemen, I support the resolution to be presented at the Troy City Council meeting on May 24th, stating that the Troy City Council opposes legislative action by the Michigan legislature restricting voting rights or interfering with local clerks' election procedures. Next comment is from Sandra Burgess. To the Honorable Troy Mayor and City Council, as a precinct delegate in Troy Precinct number 24, I express strong support for resolution number on the May 24th, 21 agenda item L1, Introduced by Councilmember Ann Erickson Galt, resolution in opposition to legislation restricting voting rights or interfering with local clerk's election procedures. The historically high voter turnout in Troy in the November 2020 general election is a testament to efficient, effective procedures employed by the Troy City Clerk and her staff, and to the staff's courageous dedication to ensuring that all Troy residents eligible to vote were afforded every opportunity to do so legitimately in the midst of a deadly pandemic. Making the process of voting as convenient as possible contributed to that record turnout without in any way detracting from the accuracy and legitimacy of the election results. Voting is a sacred act in a democracy. Protecting the right to vote against any who would attempt to diminish it is essential to maintaining democracy itself. Next comment is from Tom Kren. I attended the State of the City address last Tuesday and was impressed by the words of our mayor, Ethan Baker. I especially liked that the majority of his speech recognized the staff and volunteers who make our city run so well. Importantly, the speech he delivered explained how those people contribute to the success of our vibrant community. Spectacular job, Ethan. Next comment is from Milagros Flores. Election irregularities, including fraud in the 2020 election, has been observed and proven to be true. Many persons have lost confidence in the election process as a result. Efforts of the state legislature to restore election integrity is of utmost importance so we can trust our elections again. Denying this and condemning this effort by the state legislature is to continue the cover-up of the illegalities that took place in the 2020 elections and to depriving us voters the right to a clean electoral process. Next comment is from Carol Phelps. Dear City Council members, I am asking, no begging, that the City Council not oppose voter integrity. We all deserve fair and honest elections. To suggest something less than that would be an injustice to all Americans. Next comment is from Keith Ensroth. There is a diversity of lifestyles and capabilities in our voting population. For me, traveling the most of the last 10 years for my job, I found it very important to be able to receive an absentee ballot and drop it off easily by using the drop box in front of the city clerk's office. Every step that can be taken to enable us to meet a variety of people's needs only strengthens democracy. I strongly support passage of this resolution to continue to expand democracy rather than constrict it, as many current proposals in our state legislature are attempting to do. Next comment is from Ashley Jennings. I want to share my enthusiastic support for the resolution opposing restrictions on voting rights and interference in election administration, agenda item L1. The right to vote is sacred and essential to our democracy. It is our voice in our government. Our system depends upon and benefits from open participation in the process. Voters throughout Troy and across the state made their voices heard in record numbers over the course of our elections last year. Many of us relied upon the provisions for expanded ballot access associated with the overwhelmingly popular Proposal 3 from November 2018 to cast our votes safely and securely. Despite the fact that all evidence from a comprehensive audit confirmed the security and accuracy of our elections, some politicians in Lansing want to silence the voices of some voters and burden our election administrators with unnecessary regulations and partisan interference. I hope Troy City Council will unanimously stand against this detrimental legislation, taking a step toward ensuring that every eligible Michigander has the freedom to vote. Please use your voice to vote in support of expanding ballot access, supporting election administration, and therefore this resolution. Defense of our vote and of our democratic principles must remain a wholly American value above politics and partisan games to ensure that our elections reflect the will of the people. Next comment is from Kelly Jones. Esteemed Troy City Council, please support the resolution in opposition to legislation restricting voting rights or interfering with local clerks' election procedures as presented by Councilperson Ann Erickson Galt. These bills will create havoc in our election process and impose extreme challenges for our city and township clerks across the state. Our clerks and election officers deserve support and order when managing elections, not chaos and challenges at every step. I encourage you to support this resolution and support our amazing Clerks Department. Next comment is from Lori Evans. To the Honorable Troy Mayor and City Council, as a resident of Troy, as a precinct delegate in Troy Precinct number 29, and as an election worker, I have worked strenuously and have witnessed the dedicated efforts of others of all political affiliations throughout our city to ensure smooth voting processes for all voters in 2018, 2019, and 2020. Because of my certainty that our elections in Troy and in Michigan have been run with the utmost attention to issues of ballot and voter security, I am writing today to express total and emphatic support for the May 24th, 2020 agenda item L1 introduced by Councilmember Ann Erickson Galt, resolution in opposition to legislation restricting voting rights or interfering with local clerk's election procedures. Voters in Michigan spoke clearly about the importance of access and security in our elections when they overwhelmingly approved Proposal 3. Our clerk and her staff, clerk offices throughout the state, and our Secretary of State have taken the provisions of Proposal 3 seriously and have conducted exemplary elections that have respected all voters and the integrity of the voting process. Election reviews and audits have shown this to be the case repeatedly. We need to stand up and protect the right to vote and our citizens' clear desire to keep voting accessible for all. Any attempts to thwart the intent of Proposal 3 to restrict access to the ballot, to create barriers to casting that ballot, or to hamper the administration of our elections need to be resisted. We do not need to be solving problems that do not exist. Next comment is from Kevin Grimm. To the Honorable Troy Mayor and City Council, as a citizen of Troy who votes regularly and who has cast votes for both Republican and Democratic Party candidates, I express my strongest possible support for the resolution on May 24th, 2021 agenda, item L1, introduced by Councilmember Ann Erickson Galt, resolution in opposition to legislation restricting voting rights or interfering with local clerk's election procedures. The November 2020 provided ample evidence of the efficiency and integrity of the Troy City Clerk and her staff. With record turnout, despite the pandemic, and in accordance with the election procedures overwhelmingly approved by Troy and Michigan voters in 2018, ballot Proposal 3, city clerks in Troy and across the state delivered one of the most accurate and fair elections in our history, as we know from subsequent audits. All of us must do whatever we can to preserve the integrity of our votes and resist the shameful attack on free and fair elections being promoted by our state legislature. Next comment is from Cindy Rivers. Dear City Council members, the integrity of our elections should be of absolute importance to every single voter, to every single resident in our state and in our country. As United States citizens, there should not be an ounce of doubt that each individual vote counted, that each individual vote was counted only once, and each individual vote was verified through picture ID and a matching signature. We should never have to doubt this. We should never be left to wonder if there was fraud of any kind in our election system. As a voter in Troy, Michigan, I strongly urge you to promote and support new legislation that will ensure that our election results at every level are always without question. We should all want this. It's not a partisan issue. Democrat, Republican, Independent, we all want to know that our elections are fair and the outcomes are ones that we can trust. As City Council men and women, stand up for honesty and integrity in all things. Next comment is from Dina Shargabian-Stuber. Dear City Council, I fully support tonight's resolution to oppose any legislation that restricts voting rights or interferes with local clerks' election procedures and urge you to pass tonight's resolution. Our past elections have honored our constitutional right to vote and have been without fraud. Any legislation to restrict voting rights is to be questioned, and furthermore, the intentions of any restrictions should be scrutinized diligently. The residents of Troy are counting on you to make the right decision and to continue to protect and expand our voting rights. Please support tonight's resolution. Next comment is from a concerned resident. Dear Councilwoman Galt, with all due respect, the resolution you are proposing in item L1 does not represent the views of the majority of residents in Troy. You were elected to represent all 82,000 residents, not just the 8,000 that voted for you in 2019. We the people are not against transparency and accountability in our election process. We the people are not opposed to election reform that holds government employees accountable. Your resolution only generically refers to legislation you are opposed to. Why are you intentionally not naming which specific bills you are opposing? You are an attorney. You should know better than that. The details matter. You were not elected to use your power to push your personal views and agendas down the throats of tens of thousands of people who disagree with you. We the people will not just sit back and allow you to pretend like you really care about what our residents think about this election reform legislation. If you really did care, you would propose a community engagement session or a citywide survey. This feedback would be the true gauge of what Troy's residents really want to do about election reform. Your resolution is a disgusting attempt to circumvent the will of the people. Your resolution is yet another blatant example of extreme liberal politics trying to interfere with election transparency. We the people are sick and tired of politicians who only think they know what their constituents want without taking the time to really ask. Your resolution has no place in a city like Troy, who's been fighting for integrity and transparency for the past 5 years. It's time to move forward, not backwards. In 2017, you filed a lawsuit against the city demanding transparency. And here we are 4 years later, and the question people are asking themselves is, why are you fighting against transparency now? Why are you asking your fellow council members to vote against election reform that champions transparency? Why? Well, I think we all know the answer. It's pretty obvious. I respectfully ask all council members to oppose this resolution. It's no badge of honor to forward this resolution to Lansing. It's a stain on our city and the proof of taxation without representation. We the people want our voices heard in Lansing, not just the voices of 7 members on this council. Next comment is from Ruiha Han. Dear Sir, as a concerned citizen of Troy, I think Troy did a very good job in the past election compared to some other cities in the news. But that doesn't mean we don't have issues. The state legislature's efforts to restore election integrity is therefore no indictment on the city clerk Aileen Dixon and her staff. Election integrity legislation under consideration is designed to address the irregularities and questionable practices revealed during the 2020 election. For example, expansion of absentee votes without safeguards against fraud, the dispensation of voter signature verification purportedly because of COVID, private companies funding elections, unacceptable on its face, but also revealed to have favored one political party, and ballot harvesting. There are millions of people who still believe that there was widespread fraud in the 2020 election, my household included. We would be more convinced by a full forensic statewide audit of the 2020 election than by claims made by the media. Next comment is from Joe Anderson. Dear City Council members, my name is Joe Anderson, and I support the resolution that Councilperson Ann Erickson-Galt is proposing. If our City Clerk Aileen Dixon felt last year's elections were safe and secure, then we as a city should be able to continue with voting methods that make it more convenient for all eligible voters as long as it is securely run, which from all reports it has and has been. It was and has been. The state should not pass laws to restrict voter rights based on false information, lies, or the need to try and sway an election one way or the other. Please support this resolution and send it to the State House to show them a united front against voter suppression. The next comment is from Mahendra Kenkri. Dear City Council, I wholeheartedly support the resolution in opposition to legislation restricting voting rights. The resolution respects and reinforces the decision of Troy voters to expand access to our ballot. Our city clerk and city staff have done a great job in conducting several elections since passing of Proposal 3, providing ballot drop boxes and with absentee voting. The next comment is from Kathleen Frank. Council members, I want to thank Erickson-Galt for this resolution to protect the voting rights of Michiganders who voted overwhelmingly for Proposition 3 in November 2018. As a longtime resident of Troy and a lifetime resident of Michigan, I am appalled that Michigan would consider taking this backward step that would reduce the ability of our citizens to easily cast their ballots. It threatens our democracy. After an amazingly safe and fair election conducted during a pandemic, why hasn't the Michigan legislature listened to the few recommendations from the administrators and workers on the election front line to improve our voting process? I encourage Troy to stand up for our voting rights as stated in our Michigan Constitution and pass this resolution. Next comment is from Aletha Craig. Regarding the Troy resolution in opposition to legislation restricting voting rights, agenda item L1, I believe that every step that can be taken to enable us to meet a variety of people's voting needs only strengthens democracy. I strongly support passage of this resolution to continue to expand democracy rather than constrict it, as many current proposals in our state legislature are attempting to do. Next comment is from Randy and Phyllis Schad. We wish to give our support to Councilmember Galt's resolution in opposition to legislation aimed to restrict voting rights in Michigan. Our last election provided the easiest and most successful means for voter participation and also proved to be fair under scrupulous recounts throughout our state. There is only one reason for this legislation, and that is voter suppression. We are proud that our community leaders are taking a stand on this issue. Next comment is from Matt Hopt. Hello, Troy City Council. I am writing in support of the resolution by Councilmember Erickson-Galt on the protection of voter rights and the continued support of our wonderful city election officials. The process and procedures of an election can and should be changed if they support, 1, giving more individuals who are eligible to vote the opportunity to vote, and 2, are thoughtfully and carefully reviewed to ensure changes are fair, equitable, and have the support of local election officials. The current legislation being proposed is in response to problems that do not exist and will unnecessarily burden local election officials and voters. Making it more difficult to vote or to process ballots will ultimately obstruct more eligible voters than reduce fraud. The election process is too important to change with legislation haphazardly put together on the off chance it may deter election fraud that has not been seriously shown to be an issue. Any legislative changes should be thoughtfully considered and painstakingly vetted to ensure election integrity and not restrict voting rights. I urge the council to vote yes on this resolution. The next comment is from Kelly Martin. Hello, my name is Kelly Martin, and I'm an almost 8-year resident of the city. I've read the resolution before you today, and I would encourage a yes vote from City Council as well as Mayor Baker. Our elections are secure and have been proven to be safe by audit. Our city clerk, Ms. Dixon, has done an amazing job with communications throughout the pandemic and elections. She's made herself available for questions and sent out pertinent information in regards to ballots, drop-off locations, and election day matters. The voter suppression bills that are now in the Michigan Senate only serve to hurt our elections and place burdens on those that cannot get to the polls. We should be helping more voters participate in elections instead of taking the right away. I would ask if you plan to vote no, what proof is there that the elections were not safe, secure, and fair? Next comment is from Sveta Desai. As a long-term Troy, Michigan resident and absentee voter, I would like to provide support to the resolution being proposed by Ann Erickson-Galt, stating that the Troy City Council opposes legislative action by the Michigan legislature restricting voting rights and interfering with local clerks' election procedures. Voting should be made easier, not harder. This is the Michigan GOP proposing yet another corrupt piece of legislation. I am in support of the Troy, Michigan resolution to stop this in Michigan. Next comment is from Richard Young. Please support the resolution by Ann Galt. Next comment is from Catherine Tacey. The Attorney General found no fraud in the election, even though he looked really hard. 60-plus judges found no fraud, audit found no fraud, and yet Republicans keep pushing the big lie, in part to change voting rules. Voting is the most basic and sacred practice in a democratic republic. There is absolutely no reason to change our current voting practices, which allowed more citizens the opportunity to exercise this most sacred right of citizenship. This is simply a fake solution in search of a fake solution. That is all the emails, and we have 3 voicemails.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Burke. I've lived in Troy for 15 years. I'm grateful to have a chance to comment on your resolution that opposes the legislation on voting being proposed under City Council member Erickson-Galt. Working to preserve the integrity of American elections is the right thing to do. It's a worthy deed. We must preserve and protect this process is what makes the U.S. the greatest in the world. This country gives people the opportunity to prosper. The United States represents liberty, freedom, opportunity, and limitless future for those willing to work hard for it. Freedom is dependent on preserving a secure, fair, and safe election process. State regulations and laws addressing the security of our elections, such as requiring voter identification, not voter suppression, they comply with existing federal voting laws that prohibit discrimination, has not hurt turnout nor prevented eligible individuals from being able to vote. Election reforms are about one thing, making it easier for American citizens to vote while making it harder for cheaters to cheat. The goal is always trust, which is generated by embracing the principles of integrity. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Susan Tompkins. I've lived in Troy for 20 years. In regard to the resolution in opposition to legislation restricting voting rights or interfering with local clerks' election procedures, resolution number 20. Your resolution states, whereas full and open participation in our democracy is fundamental to our system of governance. We all know that voters in Troy are welcome at a multitude of polling stations, and according to our Secretary of State website, all registered voters in Michigan have the right to vote by mail for any reason. We certainly do not want voter suppression of any kind, but just as importantly, with this expansion of absentee voting, we must ensure that all ballots cast are legal and the will of each voter. According to the Detroit News on March 24th, the new Senate bills would specifically allow election challengers and poll watchers to use cameras to videotape the tabulating of votes and expand the rights of challengers. Challengers would have the right to observe the election process at a reasonable distance that allows them to clearly read and observe all lists of participating voters and tabulators. The Senate bills would give the board 7 more days to do their work, moving the deadline for local certification from no more than 14 days after an election to no more than 21 days. Another proposal would increase the membership of canvassing boards in large counties such as Oakland. Legislation that protects the validity of my vote is very important to our democracy. I want more secure elections. I watched hours of the Michigan election hearing, and many citizens testified under affidavit that there were problems with the election integrity. Maybe not in Troy, but that is not true of other cities here in Michigan. Your resolution states, whereas Secretary of State conducted an election audit following the November 2020 election that found no evidence of widespread fraud or election irregularities, and Detroit precinct was included in that audit. According to the Detroit News on March 15th, our Secretary of State, who conducted this audit, was ruled against in our state court of claims for giving invalid guidance regarding signature verification during the election. The state court of claims judge ruled invalid Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson's guidance issued to Michigan clerks in early October that instructed them to presume the accuracy of absentee ballot signatures. The presumption is found nowhere in state law, wrote the judge. Additionally, the same Secretary of State waited until January 2021 to remove 177,000 ineligible voters from Michigan voter rolls. The 2020 presidential election was decided by only 154,000 votes, which is clearly less than those removed. This Secretary of State does not inspire my confidence. Our legislation is working to gain the confidence of Michigan voters by ensuring all legal votes are counted accurately. Please support our legislator as they work to protect our election from any form of illegal activity. Thank you.
Good morning. This is Mrs. Bart calling. I live at 1094 Robertson Drive, Troy. My place is located at the corner of in a Shallowbrook subdivision, east of Rochester and south of Long Lake. I have been calling so many times. I have left messages and nothing has been happening. I had heard from Teresa Brooks, who was also informed about my problem, that the people, those who own the property behind us, they have built some condominiums and they had put some shrubs around my backyard, which is growing like haphazardly. They are growing, one is too short, other one is grown up too much, and it is making my yard look ugly. They are not trimming it at all. This year they were supposed to start cutting the grass also, and it is not being done. And so far nobody has come. Also about 20 years ago, those apartment complex people, those who built condominiums, they were not approved to build any apartments to be leased, and they have started building apartments. This is absolutely ridiculous, and we all property owners had come 20 years ago to City Council to object about that, and they have, I heard, started building apartments, which they are gonna lease to people. It should not be approved. Our property value will go down, and it was not approved by city at that time. What has changed, I really don't know. But please stop this. So 3 things: stop construction of apartments so that my property value doesn't go down. Secondly, they should start cutting the grass, and they should trim all these trees, otherwise take them down so that I can enjoy the good look of my backyard. Thank you. My number is 24.
And that is all the public comment.
Thank you, City Clerk Dixon. Just to check, any hands go up during any of that on Zoom?
They did not, no.
Okay. Well, that concludes those who participated in public comment this evening. Now is an opportunity for council and city administration to respond and reply. I will state, obviously we'll be discussing the council referral a little later in the meeting, so I don't think it's wise for us to go into that discussion now. There were a couple other comments in there. City Manager Miller, and relating, it was the first email we got regarding the Northfield Parkway trees. I don't know if has been, has Kurt Bovensiep had, or someone from the DPW spoken with that person, or could somebody speak with Steve, I think his name was, to discuss that issue?
Yes, we can speak to the person.
Okay. Mr. Goodman regarding the traffic and the construction on Stevenson Highway. Some more work at that. I thank Mr. Krent for the nice words. And that the last call we just had, I know she's called consistently regarding the difficulty she's having with the lack of tree trimming and bush trimming behind her. And I know we can't specifically require a developer to do that. Has there been any conversations with the developer to ask for an accommodation or anything as a neighborly friendly motive that you're aware of, Mr. Miller?
Yes. In addition to my verbal comments, it'll be in the next Q&A, but Community Development Director Brent Savidan has contacted the developer and requested that they trim it. There are no code violations, and we're at the mercy of the landowner whether or not they want to trim the shrubs.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'll just say quickly, City Clerk Dixon, thank you for reading all those. Also looks like you have wild support regardless of the resolution, so
Very nice.
appreciate that. All right, any other council reply? Councilmember Hoderick?
I had asked questions about the Northfield Parkway trees as well, and had a response from city staff, that they would be looking, and that there are trees that we allocate for such areas. And so just out loud verbally right now, an unclean response that needs to be finessed directly to the resident from you guys. But this is on the radar, and there's always a tree plan and places where we are working to put trees, and we were just named Tree City again for the umpteenth year. So I'll continue to follow up on that as well, and I wanted to commit to that resident. And there's a lot of residents along Northfield Parkway who, have noticed that and mentioned it over time. So there's already been some initial dialogue, and we'll continue to follow through on that.
Thank you. Additional council reply? All right. Gotta find out where I was here. Next on the agenda, that concludes the public comment. City Council, City Administration reply or response to public comment. There are no postponed items this evening, so we'll move on to regular business. I1 is board and committee appointments. There are no mayoral appointments this evening, but we do have some city council appointments, so I will turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem Brooks for city council appointments.
Thank you, Mayor. Let me just put this up. I would like to reappoint to the Historic District Commission John Howard Adams, Harak Chanda, and Timothy McGee for the term expiring May 15, 2024.
Support. Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, supported by Councilmember Hamilton, that City Council appoints to the Historic District Commission John Howard Adams, Harak Chanda, and Timothy McGee for the terms expiring May 15th, 2024. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Krenga?
Yes.
Motion carries. We thank the three of them for their service.
Thank you. And then for the Zoning Board of Appeals, I would like to appoint Barbara Chambers and Jeffrey Forrester as alternates for the term expiring January 31st, 2024, and Mahendra Kankri and Thomas Desmond for the term expiring April 30th, 2024.
Support.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, supported by Councilmember Erickson Galt, that City Council appoints to the Zoning Board of Appeals Barbara Chambers and Jeffrey Forster as alternates for the terms expiring January 31st, 2024, and Mahendra Kankri and Thomas Desmond to the term expiring April 30th, 2024. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Krenga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Motion carries. Again, thank them. I thank them for their service. Next up, I2 Board and Committee nominations. I have no mayoral nominations this evening. Mayor Pro Tem Brooks, any council nominations? All right. We'll move on to I3. There's no closed session requested this evening. So next is I4, a budget amendment and standard purchasing resolution for State of Michigan MI Deal Cooperative Purchasing Agreement Police Fleet Vehicle. That'll be introduced by Public Works Director Kurt Bovenseep.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Before you tonight, again, is for our efforts in full transparency. Because it's on regular business, it does require a budget amendment. This was a vehicle that was a total loss due to an accident in our police department. Fortunately, no one was severely hurt, but it does require us to replace that vehicle unforeseen. So with the salvage value and then the insurance claim on the vehicle, this would be a net cost of $5,700 to replace this vehicle with an Equinox.
Thank you, Kurt. Any questions for Kurt? Want to move the resolution? Councilmember Hoderick.
I will move I4, Budget Amendment and Standard Purchasing Resolution 4, State of Michigan My Deal Cooperative Purchasing Agreement, Police Fleet Vehicle, as printed in tonight's agenda.
Support.
Moved by Councilmember Hoderick, supported by Councilmember Hamilton, that we approve I4, Budget Amendment and Standard State of Michigan My Deal Cooperative Purchasing Agreement Police Fleet Vehicle as printed in the agenda packet. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Crainga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Motion carries. Next up is I5, Troy reopens for business, a resolution to extend additional temporary signage allowances, and this will be introduced by Community Development Director Brent Savant, actually City Manager Mark Miller.
Thank you, Mayor. Brent has planning commission tomorrow night, so I let him go home. So really, this is just an 180-day extension of the previous provisions to allow for additional signage during COVID. I would expect, as COVID goes away, we would not re-up this in another 180 days.
Thank you. Any questions for City Management? Someone want to move this resolution? Councilmember Hamilton?
I'll move I5, Troy reopens for business, a resolution to extend additional temporary signage allowances as printed in the agenda.
Support.
Moved by Councilmember Hamilton, supported by Councilmember Erickson Galt, that we approve I5, Troy reopens for business, a resolution to extend additional temporary signage allowances as printed in the agenda packet. Any discussion? Just a quick thank you to City Management for bringing this back to us and looking out for our businesses. Thank you. The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Crainga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Motion carries. Next up is I6, a budget amendment and standard purchasing resolution 4, Oakland County Purchasing Cooperative Police Department Dispatch Electrical Grounding Upgrade, introduced by Chief of Police Frank Nastasi and Sam Califf, the communications supervisor, who's standing in the back. He's afraid to come forward.
He is. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is not my strong bailiwick, electrical grounding, so I brought the resident expert for questions. Oakland County is upgrading across the board all dispatch with new radios. It's been long overdue. During their site assessment of our location, they found that the electrical grounding deficiency, which would affect our ability to offer continuous service if there was an electrical strike or some sort of electrical surge. So with that being said, we're requesting to waive the bid process and award the contract for electrical grading upgrade to Shaw Electric, who was chosen as electrical contractor via their My Deal endorsed pricing and cooperative agreement with the City of Troy Purchasing Department. So if there's any questions, I'm glad to field them at this time.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions from council? A couple were answered or asked and answered earlier in the written responses.
Okay.
I guess you didn't need to come forward, Sam, after all, but thank you. Someone like to move the resolution? Councilmember Abraham?
I'll move I6, Budget Amendment and Standard Purchasing Resolution 4, Oakland County Purchasing Cooperative Police Department Dispatch Electrical Grounding Upgrade as printed in the agenda.
Support.
Moved by Councilmember. Mayor DJ. DJ Mayor. Moved by Councilmember Hoderick, moved by Councilmember Abraham, supported by Councilmember Hoderick, that we approve I-6 budget amendment and standard purchasing resolution for Oakland County Purchasing Cooperative Police Department Dispatch Electrical Grounding Upgrade as printed in the agenda packet. Any discussion?
I just hope that doesn't mean we're going to, that those 10 resolutions, we're going to order it 10 times.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Just looking at the communications supervisor here, we don't always get to have you in the council chamber with us, and pass on hello to that team. And we value that team very much, and all the work that you do. So it's just kind of a nice opportunity to see you. I'm sorry you have to be out late here on a Monday night with us, but it's such a critical part of all our, fire, police, just our community connection. Sometimes you folks are maybe the only person a resident talks to in the city. So I don't know, I just wanted to take a second to say thank you for all you do. And I hope you get grounded.
Any other discussion? At the vote, Ms. Dixon?
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Crainga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes. Motion carries. Next on the agenda is I-7, the confirmation of appointment of Kelly Tim to City Assessor, who's been very patiently waiting in the back this whole night, even though she doesn't need to be here, but that's how dedicated she is. City Manager Miller?
Thank you, Mayor. As you stated, management has offered a position to Kelly Tim, and because the charter requires the administrative officers to be confirmed in front by council, that's why we're here tonight. I believe all of you did meet Ms. Tim, who is in the audience. Also, the way that the resolution was written is that her pre-employment screening would have to be completed before the confirmation is full, but that did close today. So she has met all of our pre-employment screening. So once you approve this, she will be already set to go and start on June 14th. And the one thing, if you don't know, that there are a very limited number of persons in the state of Michigan who hold the certification, assessing certification, who can then be responsible for our tax roll. And Ms. Tim does meet that certification. So we're happy to have her on board and start in mid-June. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Any questions for Mark? All right, well, I'll move I-7, confirmation of appointment of Kelly Tim to City Assessor as printed in the agenda packet.
Support.
I think so. All right. Moved by the chair, supported by Councilmember Chamberlain Crainga, that we approve I-7, confirmation of appointment of Kelly Tim to City Assessor as printed. Any discussion? Can't say it officially yet, but get ready to say welcome. All right, the vote, Ms. Dixon.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Crainga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Motion carries. Welcome, Kelly. Thank you. You can go home if you want. All right. That concludes regular business this evening. Next up is the consent agenda. Would anyone like to pull an item for further discussion on the consent agenda? Councilmember Abraham?
I'd like to move all items on the consent agenda as printed.
Support.
Moved by Councilmember Abraham, supported by Councilmember Hoderick, that we approve all items on the consent agenda as printed in the agenda packet. Any discussion? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Chamberlain Crainga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Yes.
Motion carries. If you're here for a consent agenda item, which no one is, everything's been approved this evening. Well, maybe the chief is, so let's see, I don't know. Next up are memorandums and future council agenda items. I do have two to announce this evening. K1, announcement of public hearings. A, conditional rezoning, CRJPLN 2019-001, proposed MNK Troy 1 LLC, conditional rezoning east side of Rochester Road, south of Shallow, Sidwell, number 88-20-14-152-001. And number 88-20-14-301-031, Section 14, from R1C, one family residential, RT, one family attached residential, and EP, environmental protection districts, to RT, one family attached residential district. And B, a preliminary site plan review, file number SP 2020-013, proposed the Meadows of Troy, one family residential cluster, east of John R., north of Square Lake, number 88-20-01-300-016, section 01, currently zoned R1D, one family residential district. So those will be next week, or next meeting. There are no memorandums, K2. Next up is council referrals. We have one this evening. L1 is a council referral from Councilmember Erickson Galt, a resolution in opposition to legislation restricting voting rights or interfering with local clerk election procedures. And I will turn it over to Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Thank you, Mayor. It's been a long meeting. We had a lot of public comment, and I had some comments that I wrote down, but I thought, you know, a lot of people in the public comment session have pretty much said a lot of what I was going to say anyways. So the one thing I just wanted to mention, sort of in a little bit of a response to Mr. Murish, I did struggle with whether I was staying in my lane with this resolution. I try to focus on local issues. I think that that's what we were elected to do, is handle local issues. And I try to ignore somewhat some of the shenanigans that go on in Lansing, because they're not necessarily or usually things that affect us here locally. And in addition, you know, I have on occasion been labeled a partisan, so I work really hard to ensure that when I'm proposing something or voting on something, I'm doing it for the betterment of everybody in Troy. Unfortunately, I think what we're being faced with currently are issues that directly affect many constituents in Troy. And more importantly, affect our local clerk's ability to conduct elections fairly and efficiently. In November 2018, 66% of the voters in Troy decided to pass Proposition 3, which was mentioned in some of the public comment. And so I won't go into specifics about that, but the key takeaway is Troy voters want voting to be fair, to be more accessible, to be easier, not restricted. And this package of legislation that we're seeing coming out of Lansing, 39 total bills, it's restricting. It's violating and opposing the intent of that 66% of Troy voters who wanted voting to be more accessible, that wanted voting to be more fair, that wanted voting to be more efficient. And so I think that the things that disturb me in particular are the measures such as limiting access to ballot boxes, the ballot drop boxes, limiting the amount of time that our local clerks have to process ballots, to process absentee ballots, to do all of the things that they need to do to ensure that our local elections are as fair and efficient and open and accessible as possible. I strongly disagree with many of the people that believe that what's happening in Lansing is about election integrity. Our elections have been audited. There has been no evidence of widespread voter fraud. There's been no evidence of even widespread irregularities that would call into question the integrity of our ballots. Our voters can count on the fact that local clerks such as our amazing Aileen Dixon and her equally amazing staff, who work so hard to make sure that our elections are as safe and have as much integrity as possible. So I don't really think this is about election integrity. I think this is about fairness. I think this is about having open elections. I think this is about making sure that everyone has the right to vote. So that's why I've brought this forward, and I'm very, I wrote this resolution kind of in a hurry, so I'm very much open to suggestions as to the language, but I believe the intent is spot on and comports with that 66% of Troy voters who wanted to have broader protections for voting rights. So that's why I've brought this resolution, and I will look forward to hearing what my other members of council have to say.
Would you like to move the resolution?
Oh, that would be a great idea. I think I should do that. Do I need to read the whole thing, or do I need, okay. I would like to move L1, council referral from Councilmember Erickson Galt, resolution in opposition to legislation restricting voting rights or interfering with local clerk election procedures.
Support.
Moved by Councilmember Erickson Galt and supported by Councilmember Hamilton that we approve L1, council referral from Councilmember Erickson Galt, resolution in opposition to legislation restricting voting rights or interfering with local clerk election procedures. Discussion. Councilmember Erickson Galt, I assume you've.
Yes,
You're good for now. Okay.
Good.
Councilmember Hamilton.
I don't want to repeat so much of what's already been said. I think the fundamental issue here is what problem are we solving? I'm an engineer. Our goal, our job is to solve problems. But the fact is there isn't a problem. The election had integrity. The election was free and fair. There are courts and audits and people of all political leanings that agreed with that. There have been judges that have looked into all the different affidavits that tried to claim fraud that were appointed by our last president and the previous president and the previous president, and they all came to the same conclusion that none of the evidence of any widespread fraud was legit. So why would we add restrictions to voting if it's solving a problem that doesn't exist? The result of that would just be less eligible people being able to vote while not reducing fraud, because fraud is minimal or doesn't exist. So I don't see the point of these. And really, I'm just going to defer and respect the opinion of the Oakland County Clerks Association, which there is in our reports, they have provided a resolution that they passed. Our clerk was the one who moved the resolution, actually. It passed unanimously, and it talks about the different bills that are being proposed. And they do support some of them, and there are a few of them that are reasonable. There's some that they oppose as written, but think that they could be tweaked to be better. But the vast majority of them, they are against, because, I mean, one of these bills decriminalizes challengers who sign affidavits of training that are fraudulent. That is SB 291, 292, 293. To me, that directly affects our city business and how we run elections if that is allowed. And so I agree with the point that it's not our job to get involved in Lansing and Washington when we can avoid it. But I remember when I was first on council 4 years ago, I think it was Councilmember Abraham that put forth a resolution opposing gutting of police and fire pensions, some proposed legislation that was floating through the legislature at the time that ended up, I think, dying in committee or something. And that directly affected something that is our number one priority, which is our police and fire. And running fair elections is right up there with our priorities. So I support this. I think this is a rare case where it's worth it for us to weigh in. I do think that this is what the residents of Troy, the majority of residents of Troy, the super majority of residents of Troy believe. I respect the opinion of those who disagree, but I think we need to have a unified voice here and defend our clerk's office. So I support this.
Thank you, Councilmember Hamilton. Additional council members ready to go? Councilmember Hoderick?
Okay, I'll go. my fellow council members and the mayor know I agree, Mr. Murish, I don't like to get involved. You heard me back many years ago talking about let's not be partisan from the council table, right? And I think we really are collectively working in that regard. And the mayor talked about it in his State of the City. And Councilwoman Erickson Galt, she and I have had many conversations about this as well. And it's interesting that there's a significant portion of our community who does not see this as partisan, right? And then there are others that do from a different, we are in such a divided time. Earlier in this meeting, there was references to the people wearing orange regarding the safe ownership of guns. I purposely wore purple tonight because with this resolution in mind, thinking, how do we give voice to something so critically important and somehow in this era not have a significant portion of the community, if I voted no on this, there'd be people angry at me. If I vote yes on this, there are people angry at me. And we shouldn't be, we make people angry enough when we have to make difficult cluster development decisions. So, how can we get there? And, it's just the higher order question that we always have to ask ourselves from this table, and I do believe we do, is what makes sense for our city, for our fellow residents, and for our employees. And some of what is in the legislation in Lansing, I know from watching our city clerk and this entire staff on election day, it's a full, all hands on deck to make sure people are safe, that the ballots are protected. I think you know how hard that work is. Some of what's being put in here, our ability, our staff's ability, our clerk's ability, she'll do back handsprings and triple summies and do everything that the law says to do. But it is our responsibility to be looking out for what's realistic. So what's beautiful is in the same agenda packet with this referral is the tremendous work that the Oakland County clerks did. The detailed analysis of the many bills that are going through. And I don't know if anybody's even watching at this point, but they highlight each bill and they give voice, expert voice, to what works in some of them and what doesn't work. And some whereases that capture what we all, frankly, whether we're red, blue, or purple, we all agree about in terms of elections and access and integrity. So to try to help us, and we are in such a good place with this council, this staff, and I believe in the city, and the mayor's heard me say, I feel like we're living in hashtag hell. I can't stand defund the police hashtag, and I cannot stand the hashtag stop the steal. They're both divisive, and they are both not rooted in the ability for rational discussion to seek solutions. They cause us to all react to one another and back up. So maybe, and I had heartburn about this, because elections shouldn't be partisan, right? We essentially, when you heard everybody, whether they said to vote yes or no for this, they're talking about access, they're talking about integrity. We all support that. And we all are supporting our clerks to do their jobs well. And here they are, they're giving voice on a very specific level. So, and you, Councilwoman Erickson Galt said she's open to input. So, what if we attached this very meaningful, specific document and helped elevate it? The whole point would be to elevate this good work to the resolution that's been written. I was trying to edit. I heard people talking about integrity on both sides of the discussion about how to vote tonight. And we could add those words in, be it further resolved that the Troy City Council urges Michigan legislators, as they rightfully strive to ensure election integrity through continuous improvement, which, by the way, our clerks do after every election. There's such a full court press to always, right? Aileen, you've taught us. You wouldn't believe how hard they work to continuously improve, but election integrity through continuous improvement, do so by listening to and following the advice of local clerks. And then at the very end, be it finally resolved that this resolution be forwarded to the elected officials in the Michigan legislature who represent the city of Troy and the leadership of the Michigan House and Senate with the request that they advocate for the expansion, not restriction of voting rights, and supporting, not hampering election administration as part of their legislative priorities, while also working for the integrity of elections by focusing on the Oakland County Clerks Association resolution pertaining to election legislation, and that it be carefully considered by the state of Michigan legislature. That can give the levels of specificity that I think those that were crying, no, please, we want to make sure there's integrity and we're not sure. You know, some of us are sure it was fine and some of us in this community aren't. And that's the reality. So I feel like I'm in a rock and a hard spot. So I hope residents on all sides of this issue will understand the intent of this, which is to make sure people can vote fairly, securely, and with integrity, and that our city clerk and our entire staff that works on elections, who, by the way, when the day ends, if the results aren't there by 8:10, guess what? Who's hearing from everybody, right? There's this tremendous expectation. And our city clerk, January before, the winter before the election, the clerks were advocating for being allowed to tabulate the absentee ballots early, or much earlier than they were allowed for. Had they been listened to, we would not be in the hot mess that we were in terms of hysteria, undue hysteria in the state of Michigan. If the clerks had been listened to, we would have had our count the same way that Ohio and Florida, very Republican states, handled their absentee ballots. That's what the clerks were advocating for. And I don't know if the community remembers, but as we were nearing the election date, a month and a half out, the clerk came to us with a resolution that we did forward to Lansing because she needed us to. She needed us to give voice to at least allowing her to begin processing absentee ballots. Her and clerks all across the state, one day ahead of time. They had one day. Had that, and they were begging for that, just that one day, which was inadequate. So, here they are again saying, we need more time to begin tabulating and working the absentees, and that's one of the detailed points that's in this document. So I would really like us to find a way forward, and all those watching feel that we've worked collaboratively. This is not partisan. This should not be partisan. And so with my purple on, that's my suggestion, and maybe that could help us get forward.
Were you making a motion? Thank you, Ellen. Sorry. Were you making a motion to amend the referral as written?
I think I will go ahead and boldly at 10:42 make a motion to amend with the comments as I put them here, and they're not probably very cleanly, but they're, did they make sense?
Yeah.
Yes, as I proposed.
I would support that.
All right, so there's a motion to amend the council referral as dictated by Councilmember Hoderick. I'm not sure City Clerk Dixon was able to capture that.
I'll get it.
But she'll get it. And it was seconded by Councilmember Erickson Galt. This is a vote to allow that amendment, not on the actual resolution, correct? That would be first.
Right. If you're done with your discussion, the first vote would be on the text that Councilmember Hoderick read, as well as attaching the OCCA resolution to the back of the first resolution. Sorry.
But the vote is for the amendment, not for the actual resolution?
Correct.
or-
It's not approving
The actual-
the final
it's just to
result.
allow
It's
the
just
amendment.
allowing that additional text and that other resolution to be attached to the first resolution. Right.
For further discussion. Okay. Discussion on that amendment? All right, let's do a vote on the amendment, and then we'll continue the
everyone clear?
conversation. Does everyone understand?
Okay.
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 You got good?
Councilmember Erickson Galt.
Yes.
Councilmember Hamilton.
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick.
Yes.
Mayor Baker.
Yes.
Councilmember Abraham.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain Krenga.
Yes.
Okay, the motion that is approved to amend the council referral on the table, which is still on the table for further discussion before a vote. Okay. Further discussion from council. Councilmember Abraham, recognizing now the motion on the table is what was just amended.
So I too noted that we had over 24 public comments, whether in person or voicemail or emails regarding L1. And I found it very striking that as I was listening to the comments, it would sound like a person was veering towards support of L1, and they weren't. And the next person would use very similar language and was supporting L1. And so I think when I hear that, it makes me hopeful, and it makes me feel like the people who are calling in from the public are motivated by good reasons, and that their reasons and their motivation are pure. I also ascribe that good motivation to the original amendment, now the amended, original resolution and now the amended resolution. Councilwoman Erickson Galt, I imagine you did go back and forth about whether to bring this forward or not. I know I certainly did on the resolution that Councilman Hamilton referenced, and that was about something that I think was a little bit less controversial, and it was about support for municipal and police retiree benefits. I appreciate Councilwoman Hoderick's amended language and her ability to think on the fly, and I'm sure she thought about this all weekend too, about how to perhaps craft additional language to reflect what our residents really want, which is fairness, which is equity. And I think that language does that. I'm really looking forward to the time where partisanship is not so divisive, and we can get to a place where we, as a society, can have heartfelt discussion without, in talking to each other, not talking at each other. And so I approach this resolution very, very tenderly, because it could take us into a tailspin. And Troy's seen enough tailspins over the past 10 years over various reasons. Troy has been in the middle of partisan fights, and it's not done anyone any good. So I think the amended language addresses that. And I think it also reflects that the fact that City Council isn't adjudicating on whether November's election was fair or not fair. That's not our role. It's not our expertise. It's not our swim lane, quite frankly, nor should it ever be. But it does reflect the fact that we do look to our experts and take their advice, their recommendations, and we take it seriously. I think all of us have been effusive in our praise of our city clerk and the city clerk's office, and not just for this last November's election, but in all the elections before that, using innovative techniques and advocating for our citizens, our residents, at all times. Ms. Dixon has gone to Lansing, testified in the legislature based on her expertise. And we have always trusted her guidance over the years. It's not a newfound respect. It's one that's been built over many years. And so when I see resolution, or my apologies, the item M4, Oakland County Clerks Association resolution from the May 20th, 2021 membership meeting pertaining to election legislation being considered in the state of Michigan legislature. And for those who are still awake and watching, I urge you to go to the council agenda packet and read that M4B as in boy. It is extremely detailed about what works well in the proposed legislation, what the clerks support, but maybe not support the execution or the language as written, and explains why, and where it's not supported, again, based off of their expertise. And I find M4B to be such compelling reading. I never thought election documentation could be compelling reading, but it is. I really appreciate the thoroughness. I guess I shouldn't be surprised by the thoroughness of the Oakland County's Clerks Association for really bringing that clarity of trying to help the legislature do what I think everyone wants, to have the integrity, to have fair elections, to have equity. And so when I see the Oakland County Clerks Association speak so strongly, and I think unanimously, and I know my own city clerk is part of that, it is extremely compelling to me. And so while I tend to not want to wade into state legislature issues and certainly don't want to get into federal issues, I will be supporting the amended resolution because it gets to the heart of the matter. It's elevating our clerks' expertise here at a city level and at the clerk's level, and making sure it gets the attention it deserves in Lansing. So thank you, Ms. Dixon, for everything you have done, are doing, and I know will do in future elections.
Thank you, Councilmember Abraham. Mayor Pro Tem Brooks.
Thank you, Mayor. It's hard to go after Councilmember Abraham. But everyone has so eloquently spoken and articulated a lot of my thoughts and feelings as well. As Mr. Mersch said, it is challenging, when we're in this position to kind of know what's best to stay in our lane and really focus on the business of Troy. And I struggle with that all the time. I absolutely don't want to, step into everything that's coming out of Lansing or definitely not at the federal level. However, this is some legislation that will directly affect our residents, and it can directly affect our city clerk's ability to potentially do the best job that she feels that she can do. And so I think that there are times that we do have to stand up and also push for what is best for, our residents. And as it's been said, on both sides of the aisle, everyone wants to see a free and fair election. I think everyone wants the same thing. And that's what's so interesting about this, is that there's really no dispute about that. And so I think it's just about sometimes the way people approach it. But I think that in the end, we all want to see a free and fair election. I don't think we want to see anybody disenfranchised. And I think that there is some legislation that can potentially be overburdensome and cause some citizens to not be able to have the opportunity to vote in the way that we would like to see them vote. So essentially, for that reason, I will also be in support of this resolution. And it's because I do believe that it is important for us to stand up for free and fair elections as well, and to look out for our residents and look out for our city clerks. And I'm absolutely ecstatic that we are attaching the position from the Oakland County Clerks Association as well, because I did find that to be very thoughtful. There are some proposals that maybe do need to be looked at. I think that it is important that we're looking at our election system and we're constantly trying to improve it. But then there are other proposals that maybe don't make sense. And so we don't want to lump everything in the same basket, and really just take each proposal for what it is and kind of, really be thoughtful about the process. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Brooks. Councilmember Chamberlain-Cranger?
I will be brief. I know it is late. We've spent a long time here, and I just want to start by thanking both Councilmember Erickson-Galt, Councilmember Hoderick. Thank you for that brilliant suggestion to be able to attach the M04B, the Oakland County Clerks Association resolution. When I read that, I initially wanted to find, is there a way to crosswalk that sort of information with each other, the initial resolution and that brilliant piece that just dissected every element of every piece of legislation that is in Lansing right now. And as Councilmember Abraham said, please have a look at it if this concerns you. And as we also said, we know this concerns everyone, whether you're on the left or the right, it concerns everyone. And our commitment here, sitting here, is to be nonpartisan and to take that information and do what's best for our clerk and what's best for our residents. And we have, as was also shared, have had a history by putting forward resolutions to Lansing when it would affect the work of our clerk, and that was also highlighted here. So that's why we believe we need to take a stand and why I do support this. So it was a brilliant move. Thank you again for finding a way to connect this and be able to ground it in that beautiful evidence base that we see coming out from our Oakland County clerk. So we want to do everything that we can to support our clerk and to support democracy. Thank you. Thank you,
Councilmember Chamberlain-Cranger. Well, everyone loves it when I start a speech at 11 o'clock at night. Look, I'm glad you're laughing now, Ellen. Let me start with first, Councilmember Erickson-Galt. I'm sure you wrestled with this. I understand from some things I saw you even had kind of a rough end to your week, so I'm sure this just added a whole other level of things. So I appreciate you stepping out and doing something like this. I've brought 2 council referrals in my 5.5 years. One was resoundingly defeated, 2-5, and one passed 4-3. Both had controversy in of themselves, but not partisan controversy. That is something that I struggle with, and I spoke about it Wednesday night, partisanship, nonpartisanship, and the importance of not bringing partisan issues to this table, recognizing that they exist, but doing everything we can to stay away from them. The council referrals are a fascinating thing. And Edna, you've brought a couple one didn't pass at a very tough time in this city, one did. David, you brought one that did pass. It was a long night. So again, I appreciate what that takes inside of you to bring it forward, to step out there and take that risk. So let me start with that, because I think that is something that's not easy, and you definitely earn your $175 a month when that comes up. And Councilmember Hoderick, trying to legislate and make amendments from the table, even if you've, twice tonight. I mean, first of all, shame on you. Second of all, appreciate what you've done. I do think, I supported the amendment because I do think what you proposed made what Councilmember Erickson Galt had originally submitted. I do think it makes it better. I don't know, I hope that it was captured fully what it is, and I know there's a recorded version of it. But I need to talk a little bit about some of the things we heard from public comment tonight, and some of the things I'm thinking about as I read this and absorb all of this and hear all of you speak. And you all speak very eloquently, and we had some very eloquent public comment this evening on both sides of the issue. And the fact that there is both sides of an issue is frustrating, because one of you said, this is something, that we all want free and fair elections. How we get there are sometimes two different ways, and that's the difficulty tonight. I was fascinated listening to the public comment that there were two camps in a sense. I know the obvious partisan camps, and because I know a lot of the people that participated, I know exactly where they lie, which makes it difficult for me in a way. But it either seemed that people were talking about not diminishing voter rights, or they were talking about election integrity. Apparently, those things can't survive together, or at least that's how it sounded, according to public comment. Councilmember Hoderick tried to combine them a little bit by adding the language, and I appreciate that. I do have concerns that we are wading into a partisan issue that, even though it maybe shouldn't be partisan, it quite clearly is. I know that both organized parties sent out emails and requests on social media to get people to comment tonight. That bothers me in a nonpartisan position at a nonpartisan council table. That makes it partisan, because you've got parties advocating for what their party position is on these specific bills in Lansing. And it makes me very uncomfortable, because I think that can open the door to a path that we don't want to go down in this city. It's not good for our city. We've seen what it's done in the past. We worked really hard to get past that, some of us harder than others, many years in the process. And this, I feel, puts us at risk for doing that again. And I don't like it. I would look like a big idiot, in a sense, when I constantly sang Aileen's praises. I did so last Wednesday night, talking about all the creativity she did and her team and how hard she worked to conduct two very successful elections with record turnout during COVID. I think that if I could do a resolution tonight that just sings those praises again, I'd be more comfortable, because I think, as you heard, even the people who are against or opposing this referral still supported you, Aileen. And I know you soaked that. I hope you soaked that in. I know you heard it, but it's important for you and Cheryl and everybody in your office to really absorb that, because I think it's important. On the same part of that, I don't know what this referral actually does. It's our state representative is all but certain to vote against most of these bills, if not all of them in Lansing. Our state senator, the same. I suppose the governor will probably veto these bills if they pass. I heard some of the public comment speaking as if we were taking action, which is not the case. We aren't doing anything for election integrity or for voter rights, either in favor of them or to diminish them. But that's the message that's getting sent when we have council referrals like this. And again, it's a dangerous path for us as a city. I love M4B. what the Oakland County Clerks Association did. I think, regardless of what you think about their positions on the bills, I think it's the proper approach. It spells out why they support bills, why they don't support bills. They're the experts. We're not the experts. And again, jumping into something like this makes me very uncomfortable. The question was asked, what problem are we solving? And it was asked in regard to the bills in Lansing. My question is, what problem are we solving with this resolution? I don't know that it's the right thing for us. The amendment goes a long way we passed towards making it more palatable to, I think, all residents in Troy. But I'm not sure it does enough, and I'm not sure late at night it will satisfy even those people. I recognize there's a huge risk by even some of the things I've said right now, and it will likely be used against me, whether it's social media or something down the line, because suddenly Mayor Baker, he believes in the big lie, or he's a stop the steal guy. And that's the problem with talking about these kind of issues from this table, when we should be focusing on neighborhood nodes, and we should be focusing on the streets that need new concrete. And I'm frustrated that we have to come to this tonight and talk about it. Unfortunately for me, I'm going to have to vote against this resolution, not because I don't think it's a noble attempt to bring attention to an issue that needs to have attention brought to it, but from a principled standpoint, I just can't speak last week about not bringing partisan things to our table and then bring a partisan and then vote in favor of a partisan issue that doesn't actually have any teeth or weight to do anything. I do believe it's partisan because if Democrats are taking one position and Republicans are taking another position, that is by definition, it makes it partisan. And I appreciate the work you did, Ann, the work you did, Ellen, to try to make it a better product, but I can't in good conscience support it tonight. And to the residents of Troy, please understand, and Aileen, I'm not, again, I think the work you've done is fantastic, and I personally lobbied former Speaker Chatfield on your behalf and trying to say, hey, we need these things passed in Lansing to help us out. And I'm not somebody that's looking to disenfranchise any votes or perpetrate a story that's being told by some in this country to create more confusion and distrust of our government. It's not about that. It's about process and what we should be doing from this table. So I'm going to have to leave it at that. And again, Ann, thank you. Ellen, thank you. Everybody spoke very eloquently tonight and has said good things. That will continue to be a conversation in our city and our country, I'm sure. So, anyone else have any additional comments? The vote, Ms. Dixon.
Councilmember Hamilton?
Yes.
Councilmember Hoderick?
Yes.
Mayor Baker?
No.
Councilmember Abraham?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Brooks?
Yes.
Councilmember Chamberlain-Crainga?
Yes.
Councilmember Erickson Galt?
Yes.
Motion carries. Next up are reports. Does anybody have anything they'd like to discuss as it relates to the reports tonight? We've had some good conversation on M4B. There are some really good reports. Councilmember Hamilton, I'm sure you will. Go ahead. Go for it.
I wrote notes on it, but I'll try to be brief. I know it's late. There's so many good reports here. I recommend people read them. There's a fire department annual report for the amazing work they did in very difficult last year. We got an interim financial report for the last 9 months before March 31st, and our city is doing well. Our golf courses are doing awesome, and the cash flow on them is really good. It's great to see the people out there, and we really needed it because there were, finances of the golf courses we've talked about in the past. I was very intrigued by the economic development report. This was by Glenn Lapin, our economic development specialist, and it kind of gave a sense of what the effect of COVID was on our commercial properties. I was a little, positively shocked that I thought our vacancies would be a lot worse than what I saw. You saw office vacancy rate was up 2.4%, but it's still less than the 10-year average. Industrial was up 1.2%, still less than the 10-year average. Retail was up 1.1%, which was a little above the 10-year average. But overall rents are up too. So the damage, there's some, there was some pain there, but it was a lot less than what I expected, and there's a lot of exciting things happening economically in the city, and a lot of good projects, a lot of good employers coming in, so I think you should read that. It makes me very hopeful that we'll get through this pretty quickly. And there was also a report on the future planning for Troy Trails. And I had more written, but I'll read that, and that will be continuing a discussion of the long-term plan for our trails.
Thank you, Councilmember Hamilton. Any other comments on the reports this evening? They're good. Read them, citizens of Troy. They really are. It's good information. We should sometimes start with the reports, I think. Okay. Next up is council comments. Any additional council comments this evening? Don't be shy. Councilmember Hamilton?
I'll try to be brief again. Just wanted to thank you, Mayor Baker, for your State of the City. I thought you did a fantastic job. And I totally respect your vote this evening on the referral. I listened wholeheartedly to what you said last week, and I understand your vote comes from a place of believing in staying out of partisan issues. And I understand. I don't have any doubts of your intent on that vote. I just wanted to mention that if you don't want to stare at Mayor Baker's speech for 3 hours, he did post the transcript on the website, so that was very helpful. I know I read the county executives, and it only took me like 3 minutes instead of an hour. But I also want to mention the Walk and Run for Nature at the Stage Nature Center, which is a 5K and a 1K, is coming up Saturday, June 12th. It's from 8:55 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. They kind of stagger when everyone goes instead of everyone going at the same time. I wrote specifically in my note, I will crush Baker, because we are both going to be running in it. And my goal is to,
By the way, Rebecca's going to crush both of us.
Yeah, she is. But that's why I'm focusing on you. I know that. But my goal is to lap the time your State of the City took place. Your State of the City speech was 55 minutes. So my goal is a 27.5-minute 5K, which I've done 28 minutes. So I'm going to lap the length of your speech with my 5K.
There's hills up there in that part of town, so just so you know.
But that's it. That's
all right. Additional council comments? Councilmember Chamberlain-Kranga.
I'll try to be brief. So I did have some comments on the economic report, and I'm going to kind of loop it in because I did want to just thank Glenn Lapin for all of his work, and especially that new Troy Business Connect that he's done. He's reshaped the digital newsletters that go out to our community, so really want to call him out for that work. Another thing, and it ties to your State of the City, thank you again, Mayor. It was an excellent State of the City address. And something that you raised that also made me think of that economic development report is what does it mean to create a healthy business environment, and thinking that it is around having access to some of these business incentives that mostly come from the state and the county, as well as these grants, but also it's our zoning. You brought that up in the State of the City, and that's part of creating this wider ecosystem that really helps to foster a great business community. And so I'm grateful for how you see that come out in that report, so do have a look at that one. Another thing was just in terms of what it means to be council members, one of the things that I love most, and it's kind of what you also spoke to, Mayor, is really troubleshooting issues for our residents, kind of getting on the ground. And this weekend I had a chance just to kind of touch base with people in my neighborhood. I'd held a recent community conversation to update them on the budget, and wanted to also just circle back to see if people had questions. And it was a chance to talk, and they of course had lots of different opinions. Road construction was a big one, and I will probably be following up in the next week with our staff around different questions that came. And that's something I also want to appreciate city staff, is a big part of what you do is answer and troubleshoot these issues and questions our residents have. And it's work that they may not always see, but you devote hours and hours to it. And it's something that I really appreciate and something that I really value about being a council member. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Chamberlain-Kranga. Councilmember Abraham?
Thank you, Mayor. Monday, of course, is Memorial Day, and wanted to call attention to that. We're very lucky to be living in the country that we're in, and we're very lucky and hopefully all appreciative of the sacrifices that have been made in generations past and even current generations of our military, and for those that have sacrificed all so that we can have the freedom and the life that we have today. So I want to call attention to that. As usual, the city will be having, I guess it's not as usual, last year we didn't have it. We are resuming the Memorial Day celebration in Veterans Plaza out by City Hall, 10 a.m. on Monday. And given that COVID restrictions have been lifted, hopefully we'll have a good socially distanced and very mindful of others out to recognize the solemn occasion. One last additional comment, and I'm usually the one to say it on a long holiday weekend, particularly as our COVID restrictions are being lifted, and I think there's a lot of joy in being able to see family, friends getting out and being celebratory. I implore those who are celebrating, if they are drinking, please call an Uber, call a friend. Please do not ruin a holiday weekend for yourself, for your loved ones, or for someone else in their family by creating a situation that causes injury or death. So yes, we're all happy to have a long holiday weekend, and we've certainly are feeling the love of being a little bit more liberated with some of these restrictions being lifted, but please celebrate responsibly and make sure everyone gets home to their families after barbecues and get-togethers with their friends. Too many people have lost their lives that way.
Thank you, Councilmember Abraham. Councilmember Hoderick?
Real quick, I appreciate the bringing up about the road construction, and I know when I've been out for walks, sometimes when people can recognize me underneath my baseball cap and my sunglasses, I'm being asked why there's so much. Just kind of a reminder, when you're not in the rhythm of thinking about the city, when the I-75 modernization started, our city engineer, Bill Hootery, basically had to take his 10-year roads plan and set it and stop road work that would have been going on because we knew I-75 would spill over to our roadways. You know, our police department, the traffic lights, our city engineer. I mean, it was all hands on deck to facilitate this extra flow of traffic, including trucks. So roads that were supposed to get maintained then didn't. They've had extra wear and tear because we became an I-75 thoroughfare through Troy. And, you know, trucks were traveling on our roads at levels that they wouldn't normally for, you know, over 2 years. So I know residents are thinking, what is going on? And the orange barrels are just like, you know, this huge nemesis to all of us. But be so grateful that we are back at it and that they are getting taken care of, and there is catch-up work going on. And we only have so many months of weather that allows it. And I see our DPW director over there. I'm hoping I'm articulating this correctly, but we get it. And yes, of course, if there's traffic issues, you can call into the communication section of the police department to even say, you know, help be eyes and ears. We have extra backup. Is there anything that can be done? It's possible. We can get out there and help you and help alleviate. So just remember, we basically shelved quite a bit, and there was a lot on the books then. So please cheer on those road workers. Be careful of them. We've got a lot of people working. I know on Crooks Road right by me, I look at the traffic going by, and be aware. And yeah, I know there's bad words being uttered, but try to keep the road rage at bay. Be patient. Try to find the gratefulness, because it's a good thing that we're taking care of them at this point. So.
Thank you. Good points. Anyone else? Aquatic Center opens on Friday. It's supposed to be 56 degrees. Enjoy. But it's going to warm back up really quickly. And the good news is, because of the changing in the health orders, that the restrictions that we were going to have in place and the reservation system, that's not going to be necessary. So there'll be 50% capacity limits until June 1st, and then it's 100% open. And I think some of the email from the Recreation Department says some of the features might not be fully open until the middle of the month because of staffing issues, but Aquatic Center is going to be open and ready to go. So State of the City transcript is on the City Council page if you are looking to read it. I think the YouTube video is more entertaining, but maybe you need a quiet place to read it. Go ahead, it's on there. But appreciate everybody's comments, and unless there's anything else, thank you, city staff, for working with us as always. And I will say, healthcare heroes, keep up the good work. You're keeping our city safe and strong. And first and frontline responders, we thank you also. That includes your team, Frank, and your team, Kurt. We appreciate it. So, all right, with that, no closed session this evening. We're adjourned.